Yo, what's up everyone? It's Gringotts Hub, and today we're checking out, what if Harry used the Potter-Black-Peverell rings to strip Dumbledore of his magic during the sorting? Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Sorting. The goblin-forged rings burned against Harry's skin the first time he put them on. 3 days later, they felt like they'd always been there. He sat in the back of the leaky cauldron with his fingers wrapped around a cup of tea he hadn't touched, watching the rings catch the candlelight. The Potter ring on his right index finger, a ruby set in gold, the griffin of House Potter etched so fine you needed a magnifying glass to see its feathers. The black ring on his right middle finger, onyx and silver, the ravens and shield of the ancient and most noble house. And the Peverell ring on his left index finger, a simple, ancient band of some dark metal that wasn't quite iron and wasn't quite anything else, set with a cracked black stone that hummed against his pulse. That last one was the ring that mattered most. And the one that scared the goblins. "You're brooding again," said Griphook from across the table, not looking up from the stack of parchment he was annotating with a quill that moved almost too fast to follow. "I'm 11. And 11-year-olds don't brood. We sulk. There's a difference." Griphook's lips pulled back over his teeth. It had taken Harry a full day to realize that expression was a smile and not a threat display. "You've been sulking at that tea for 40 minutes. We have work to do." Harry finally took a sip. It was cold. "Tell me again about the bindings." Griphook set down his quill and fixed Harry with those sharp black eyes. For a goblin, Griphook was remarkably patient. Or maybe he just enjoyed watching a wizard discover exactly how thoroughly he'd been screwed over by his own kind. "Your magical core was bound at approximately 15 months of age. The binding is layered, 3 separate suppression wards tied to your blood, your magical signature, and your emotional state. The last one is particularly insidious. It tightens when you feel strong emotions, which means, every time I got angry at the Dursleys. Every time I was scared. Every time I wanted something badly enough for accidental magic to break through, the binding clamped down harder." "Correct. The signature matches Dumbledore's wand." Harry set the cup down. "And my parents' will? Sealed by order of the Chief Warlock. Illegally, as I've explained. Your parents named Sirius Black as primary guardian, Alice Longbottom as secondary, and Minerva McGonagall as tertiary. Under no circumstances were you to be placed with Petunia Dursley. That instruction was specific and repeated 3 times in the document." Griphook paused. "Your mother apparently had strong feelings about it." Something hot moved through Harry's chest. Not the rings, that was just anger. Pure and clean and entirely his own. He'd spent 10 years in a cupboard under the stairs. 10 years being told his parents were worthless drunks who died in a car crash. 10 years of Dudley's fists, Vernon's belt, and Petunia's particular talent for making a child feel like a stain on her clean floor. And all of it, every single miserable day, had happened because one man decided it served his purposes. "The vault withdrawals?" Harry asked, keeping his voice even. Griphook slid a parchment across the table. Harry had seen it before, but looking at it still made his jaw tighten. "Authorized withdrawals from the Potter family vault, not the trust vault Hagrid had taken him to, but the main vault, totaling over 2 million galleons across 10 years. Authorized by Albus Dumbledore as magical guardian. Dispersed to the Order of the Phoenix, various ministry officials, and something listed only as Project Greater Good. 2 million galleons. His parents' money. Spent by a man who'd stuffed their son in a cupboard and walked away." "Right," Harry said. He folded the parchment carefully and tucked it inside his jacket, a new jacket, properly fitted, purchased from a Muggle shop in London because Harry had decided that if he was going to burn down Albus Dumbledore's carefully constructed world, he was going to do it looking like he meant it. "Let's talk about what the rings can actually do." Griphook leaned forward. The Potter and Black rings carry the standard lordship enchantments. Legal authority over house matters, proxy voting in the Wisengamot, access to family magic stored within the ring itself. The Potter ring contains a memory archive. Every Lord Potter since the ring's creation has left impressions. You've been accessing these? Every night. Harry had spent the past 2 weeks falling asleep and waking up inside the lives of his ancestors. Charles Potter's dueling techniques. Fremont Potter's potion innovations. And his father, James Potter's voice, his laugh, the way he said Harry's name in the brief memory stored just hours before the end. Harry didn't talk about that one. What about the Peverell ring? Griphook was quiet for a moment. Goblins valued craftsmanship above almost all things, and the Peverell ring was the oldest piece of magical craftsmanship any living goblin had ever examined. The reverence in Griphook's voice was unmistakable. The Peverell ring predates the Ministry, the Statute of Secrecy, and Hogwarts itself. It carries enchantments we cannot fully identify. What we do know is that it resonates with magical law at its most fundamental level, the old laws, the ones that existed before wizards started writing them down. Blood debts. Life debts. House grievances. He paused. And the rite of magical stripping. Harry turned the Peverell ring on his finger. The cracked stone caught no light at all. Explain it to me one more time. In the old law, when one house commits grievous offenses against another, theft of gold, theft of heirs, magical assault against the bloodline, the aggrieved house may invoke the rite of stripping. The offender's magic is taken, permanently, as restitution. It has not been invoked in over 400 years. Most wizards believe it to be myth. Another goblin smile. Goblins know better. And I qualify. Dumbledore has committed offenses against both House Potter and House Black. Theft of gold from House Potter. Illegal seizure of the Potter heir. Magical assault, the core binding, against the last scion of House Potter. And as Lord Black, you hold Dumbledore accountable for the illegal imprisonment of Sirius Black, who was denied a trial through Dumbledore's direct influence as Chief Warlock. The Peverell ring provides the authority. The other 2 rings provide the standing. Together. Griphook's teeth gleamed. Together, they provide justice. Harry picked up his cold tea and drained it in one go. September 1st, he said. I want to do it in front of everyone. Griphook raised an eyebrow. That is, not subtle. I'm not interested in subtle. Dumbledore spent 10 years operating in the shadows. I want sunlight. Harry stood, dropping a galleon on the table for the tea. He'd already learned that overpaying at the Leaky Cauldron bought silence, and Tom the barkeep was constitutionally incapable of gossiping about a generous tipper. Besides, I want every kid in that hall to see what happens when you steal from the wrong family. Griphook gathered his parchments. The goblins will have the full evidence portfolio prepared and notarized. Copies will be delivered to Amelia Bones at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement simultaneously. Good. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. Harry paused at the foot of the stairs. Do try to enjoy the train ride, Griphook said. You are, as you pointed out, 11. Platform 9 3/4 was exactly as chaotic as Harry had expected and twice as loud. He pushed through the barrier at a walk, trunk shrunk in his pocket, goblin charm, technically illegal for an underage wizard, but as 3 separate goblins had pointed out with obvious delight, the trace didn't apply to goblin magic, and Hedwig on his shoulder. She was gorgeous, his owl. Snowy white, with amber eyes that tracked the crowd with the imperious disdain of a creature who knew she was the most beautiful thing in any room. Harry had bought her from Elops on his first visit to Diagon Alley, before Griphook, before the rings, before everything changed. She was the first gift he'd ever received, even if he'd bought her himself. Don't bite anyone unless I tell you to, Harry murmured. Hedwig nipped his ear, which could have meant agreement or could have meant she'd bite whoever she pleased. Fair enough. The Hogwarts Express was scarlet and magnificent, billowing steam across the platform like a dragon with a head cold. Harry found an empty compartment near the back of the train, settled in, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. The compartment door slid open maybe 10 minutes after the train pulled out of the station, and a round-faced boy with panicked eyes stumbled in, clutching a toad to his chest like it was about to make another escape attempt. "Sorry, everywhere else is full, have you seen a—" "Oh, never mind, I've got him now." The boy looked down at the toad, then up at Harry, then at Hedwig, then back at Harry. "Is that seat taken?" "All yours." The boy sat down heavily. "I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom." Something clicked in Harry's memory. Not from the Potter ring, from real life, from the Gringotts files. Alice Longbottom, secondary guardian. The woman who should have raised him if Sirius couldn't. "Harry Potter," he said, and watched Neville's eyes go wide. "You're, really? I mean, sorry, that's rude, it's fine." "Yeah, really." Neville stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked down at his toad. "My gran talks about your parents sometimes. She says your mum was the kindest person she ever met." Harry felt that hot thing in his chest again. But this time it wasn't anger. "Your mum was supposed to be my guardian, if things had gone differently. Did you know that?" Neville blinked. "No. No. My parents are in St. Mungo's. There was an attack, after the war." "I know." Harry held Neville's gaze steadily. "I'm sorry about that, Neville. Truly. Something passed between them. Not friendship exactly, that would come later, but recognition. Two boys who should have grown up together, raised by people who loved them, who'd instead been scattered by the same war and the same aftermath of convenient decisions." "That's Trevor," Harry said, nodding at the toad. "He's a menace," Neville said with a tired fondness that suggested this was a daily occurrence. "Hedwig will keep an eye on him." Hedwig swiveled her head toward the toad and fixed it with a stare that conveyed, in no uncertain terms, that escape was no longer an option. Trevor went very still. The compartment door opened again about 20 minutes later. A girl with enormous bushy brown hair and front teeth that were slightly too large for her face stuck her head in. She was already wearing her Hogwarts robes and had the expression of someone who'd read every book on the train and was now looking for someone to discuss them with. "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost," she stopped. "Oh, you found him. He's right here," Neville said, holding up Trevor. The girl stepped fully into the compartment, looked at Harry, looked at the ring on his right hand, looked at Hedwig, and then sat down uninvited with the confidence of someone who'd never once considered that she might not be welcome. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the course books already, of course, and quite a bit of supplementary material. Are you a first year too?" "Harry Potter." Her eyes went satisfyingly wide. "I've read about you. You're in, at least 4 books, all of which are wrong," Harry said. "I've checked. Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts gets the date right and nothing else. Great Wizarding Events of the 20th Century misspells my mum's name. And The Boy Who Lived, a history was written by a woman who never once spoke to anyone who actually knew my parents." Hermione's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You've actually researched it. It's my life. Seemed worth looking into." He could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes. Here was a boy who took information seriously, who checked sources, who didn't just accept what he was told. For Hermione Granger, this was apparently catnip. She sat down across from him and within 5 minutes had launched into a detailed comparison of Hogwarts, a history with an appraisal of magical education in Europe that was so thorough and so enthusiastic that Neville's eyes glazed over and Harry found himself genuinely enjoying it. Hermione was brilliant. Not just smart, her mind moved at a speed that most people probably found exhausting. Harry didn't. "You've got good instincts," he told her when she paused for breath. "Most people read the textbooks and stop there. You're cross-referencing." Hermione went slightly pink. My parents are dentists. Muggles. I didn't even know magic was real until I got my letter. I've been trying to catch up ever since. You're not behind, Harry said. Most purebloods don't read half what you have. They coast on family knowledge and assume that's enough. Speaking as a pureblood, Neville said mildly, he's not wrong. The compartment door slid open a third time, and this time the energy shifted. Draco Malfoy was exactly what Harry expected, pale, pointed, carrying himself with the particular arrogance of a boy who'd been told since birth that his name was a magic word. Two thick-set boys flanked him like bookends. He stepped into the compartment without asking, scanned the occupants, and his eyes locked onto Harry. They're saying Harry Potter's on the train. That you? Depends on who's asking. Draco's eyes narrowed slightly, then flicked to Harry's hands. He went very still. Harry watched him process it. Draco Malfoy, whatever else he might be, had been raised in the highest circles of pureblood society. He would have been taught to recognize lordship rings before he could read. And he was looking at 3 of them. Those are. Draco's voice lost its practiced drawl. That's the black ring. It is. My mother is a black. Narcissa, née Black, disowned by Walburga but never formally struck from the family tapestry. Which means she's still technically under the protection of House Black. Harry let that sit for a moment. Which means she's under my protection, Lord Malfoy's marriage contract notwithstanding. Draco's mouth worked silently. Sit down if you want, Harry said. But leave the act at the door. I'm not interested in whatever your father told you to say to me. For a long, tense moment, Draco stood in the doorway, caught between the script he'd been given and something he hadn't anticipated. Then, slowly, he sat down. Crabbe and Goyle hesitated, then squeezed in on either side of him. How? Draco asked quietly. The Black Lordship, there's no way Dumbledore would have allowed. Dumbledore doesn't control Gringotts. And the goblins don't answer to the chief warlock. Draco studied him with new eyes. The arrogance was still there, but underneath it, Harry could see calculation. Good. A Draco Malfoy who was thinking was infinitely more useful than one who was posturing. My father will want to meet with you. I'm sure he will. Tell him I'll consider it after I've settled in. Harry paused. And Draco? Whatever happens tonight at the sorting, don't interfere. You'll understand afterward. That's rather cryptic. It's a promise. Harry smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. I'm going to do something that hasn't been done in 400 years, and I'd rather not have anyone I might like caught in the blast radius. Draco stared at him. Then he stood, smoothed his robes with a gesture that was pure Narcissa, and left without another word. Crabbe and Goyle lumbered after him. Hermione turned to Harry with an expression that was equal parts fascination and alarm. What exactly are you planning? Justice, Harry said. And I could use some friends who aren't afraid of a little chaos. Neville, to his credit, didn't flinch. He just tightened his grip on Trevor and said, My gran always says the Longbottoms don't run. Hermione chewed her lip for about 3 seconds. I have so many questions. Ask them. She did. For the next 2 hours, while the countryside blurred green and gold outside the windows, Harry told them everything. The wills. The vaults. The bindings on his core. Sirius Black rotting in Azkaban without a trial. The deliberate, calculated decision by Albus Dumbledore to place Harry with abusive relatives and strip away every protection his parents had arranged. Neville went pale when Harry mentioned the core binding. His hand drifted to his own chest. Neville, Harry said carefully. When did your magic first manifest? Late. Really late. My family thought I might be a squib for years. My great-uncle Algie dropped me out a window to try to shock it out of me and I bounced, but before that. He trailed off. You don't think, I think your parents were part of the same war. I think Dumbledore was involved with everyone from that generation. And I think it would be worth having the goblins check. Neville's jaw set in a way that made him look, for just a moment, like someone you wouldn't want to cross. Yeah. I think it would. Hermione had gone very quiet during Harry's explanation. Not confused quiet. Processing quiet. When he finished, she folded her hands in her lap and said, "The legal basis for magical stripping, it's in Old Laws and Ancient Rites, Chapter 14. I thought it was theoretical." Harry grinned. He couldn't help it. "Hermione Granger, you might be the most useful person I've ever met." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," she said, and she meant it, which was both wonderful and a little heartbreaking. The sun had set by the time the train pulled into Hogsmeade Station, and the air that hit Harry's face when he stepped onto the platform was sharp and cold and smelled like pine trees and old magic. He could feel it, the ambient magic of the Scottish Highlands pressing against his skin like a warm hand. The rings pulsed in response, each one resonating with a different frequency. Potter tasted like home. Black tasted like thunder. Peverell tasted like something very old waking up. Fur's years. Fur's years over here. Hagrid. Enormous, bearded, kind-eyed Hagrid, who'd been sent to collect Harry from the Dursleys and had given him his first birthday cake. Harry felt a pang of something complicated. Hagrid wasn't part of Dumbledore's scheming, not knowingly. He was a good man used by a clever one, and Harry would have to be careful not to hurt him in the crossfire. "All right there, Harry." Hagrid beamed down at him. "Good, Hagrid. Thanks." The boats across the Black Lake were ridiculous and magical and perfect. Harry sat with Neville and Hermione and watched Hogwarts rise out of the darkness like a crown of light, towers and turrets and windows blazing against the night sky, the whole castle reflected in the still water below so that it seemed to float between two skies. And Harry felt it the moment they crossed the wards. It was like walking through a curtain of spider silk, invisible but unmistakable. The castle wards washed over him, ancient recognition magic that tasted the blood of every student who passed through. Harry felt them probe and then recoil, startled. He was a Potter, welcome. He was a Black, recognized. He was a Peverell, the castle shuddered. Not physically. Not in any way the other first years could feel. But Harry felt it in his bones, in his rings, in the marrow of his magic. Hogwarts knew him. Hogwarts remembered. The Peverell blood hadn't crossed these wards in centuries, and the castle's magic responded like a dog greeting a long-lost master, urgent, joyful, desperate. "Welcome home," something whispered. Not in words. In feelings. In the sudden warmth that spread through his chest and the way the torches in the entrance hall burned a little brighter as he walked through the doors. "Did you feel that?" Neville whispered. "You felt it too." The whole castle just twitched. Hermione looked between them, frowning. She hadn't felt it. Muggle-born, the wards didn't sing to her the same way. But she could see the torches, and she was too smart not to connect it to Harry's arrival. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall. Tall, severe, Scottish, wearing emerald robes and an expression that suggested she had been herding first years across the lake for decades and had used up her last reserves of patience somewhere around 1978. She gave them the standard speech about houses and points and the sorting ceremony. Harry watched her face while she spoke and tried to see the woman his parents had trusted as tertiary guardian. She was in there, under the professional mask. She just didn't know what had been done. Or maybe she suspected and had never been able to prove it. Either way, she was about to find out. The Great Hall was magnificent. Harry would give Hogwarts that much. For long tables stretched the length of the room under a ceiling that mirrored the night sky, stars and the thin rind of a crescent moon hanging overhead like the world's most elaborate chandelier. Candles floated in midair. Ghosts drifted between the tables. Hundreds of students in black robes sat watching the first years file in with the mix of boredom and nostalgia that upperclassmen wore like armor. And at the head table, Albus Dumbledore. Harry looked at him directly. No flinching, no odd staring, no distraction. He looked at the man who had ruined his childhood and studied him like a specimen. Dumbledore was tall, thin, and old in the way that ancient trees are old, gnarled but strong, still growing, still reaching. His beard was silver white and long enough to tuck into his belt. His robes were purple and scattered with golden stars. His eyes, behind half-moon spectacles, were the particular shade of blue that people described as twinkling, and Harry recognized immediately what that twinkle really was: passive legitimacy, a constant low-level scan of the surface thoughts of everyone in the room. The scan hit Harry's mind like a pebble hitting a fortress wall. The Potter ring flared hot, and Dumbledore's twinkle stuttered. Their eyes met across the great hall. Harry smiled. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. But something behind those blue eyes shifted, a flicker of surprise, quickly buried, followed by the careful re-evaluation of a chess player who's just noticed a piece on the board he didn't place there. That's right, Harry thought, knowing the old man couldn't hear it through the ring's protection. I'm not what you expected. McGonagall placed the Sorting Hat on a stool at the front of the hall. The hat sang a song about the 4 houses that Harry ignored entirely. He was running through the plan one final time, checking each step, each contingency, each word he'd rehearsed with Griphook until it was perfect. The sorting began. Abbott, Hannah. A blonde girl stumbled forward and jammed the hat on her head. After a moment, Hufflepuff. The table on the right erupted in cheers. Names blurred past. Bones, Susan. Boot, Terry. Brocklehurst, Mandy. Harry watched Hermione get called forward, watched the hat deliberate, watched it shout, Gryffindor, and saw her face light up with a relief so intense it was almost painful to witness. She caught Harry's eye on her way to the table, and he gave her a nod. Malfoy, Draco. The hat barely touched his head. Slytherin. Draco walked to his table with his chin high and caught Harry's eye for just a moment. Whatever he saw there made him sit down without any of the smirking or preening Harry suspected was standard Malfoy protocol. Neville went to Gryffindor after a long deliberation. He nearly walked away still wearing the hat. Harry liked him more for it. And then, Potter, Harry. The whispers started instantly. A wave of murmuring that swept through the hall like wind through grass. Harry stepped forward, and the whispers became stares. Every eye in the room turned to him, students, ghosts, professors, and Dumbledore, whose blue eyes were fixed on Harry with an intensity that had nothing to do with twinkling. Harry walked to the stool with even steps. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. McGonagall held out the sorting hat. Harry took it from her hands, which made her blink. Students didn't usually grab it, and settled it on his head. The brim fell over his eyes, and the great hall vanished. Well, 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 said a voice inside his head. Ancient, amused, and sharp as a razor. This is unexpected. Hello, Harry thought. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. I haven't spoken to a Peverell in, good heavens, it's been a long time. Antioch was the last, and he was a thoroughly unpleasant man. You're already an improvement. The hat's consciousness pressed deeper, and Harry felt it rifling through his memories with the casual efficiency of a librarian scanning a card catalogue. Oh my. Oh, this is extraordinary. Your core, they bound your core. And Dumbledore, the vaults, the will, you can see all of it. I'm the sorting hat, boy. I see everything. It's my job. A pause that felt heavy with something Harry might have called anger. I see what he's done to this castle too. The compulsions woven into the wards. Gryffindor students steered toward recklessness. Slytherin students nudged toward isolation. Every child who sits under me, touched by his modifications before I ever get to speak to them. I've been screaming about it for years. No one listens to a hat. Harry's blood went cold, then very, very hot. Compulsions in the wards. Dumbledore is the headmaster. He has access to the ward stone. He's been adjusting things. Encouraging certain personality traits. Discouraging others. Nothing dramatic, he's too clever for that. Just a nudge here, a push there. Enough to keep the houses divided. Enough to keep Slytherin as the designated villain. Enough to make sure no student ever grows powerful enough to challenge him. Harry gripped the edges of the stool. I was going to wait, he thought. I was going to let the sorting finish. Do it after. Why wait? The Hat's voice was silk over steel. You have the right. You have the standing. And I, Lord Peverell, am tired of sitting on this stool watching that man twist what the founders built. You should know, as Lord Peverell, you have authority over the castle wards. The Peverells helped lay the foundation stones. Hogwarts will answer to you, if you call. Harry breathed. In. Out. Where should I put you? The Hat asked, almost as an afterthought. You do well anywhere. Gryffindor courage, Slytherin cunning, Ravenclaw intellect, Hufflepuff loyalty, you're an even split in every way that matters. Put me wherever you think is right. But do it after. After what? Harry stood up from the stool. He did it slowly, the sorting hat still on his head, and the murmuring in the great hall went confused and then silent. Students didn't stand up during the sorting. Students didn't move at all. McGonagall took a half-step forward, her mouth opening to say something, and then stopped. Because Harry's rings were glowing. All three of them. The Potter ring burned gold. The black ring flared silver-white. And the Peverell ring pulsed with a deep, dark light that wasn't any color Harry had a name for, something that lived between purple and black and the absence of light altogether. The glow spread up his arms and settled around him like a cloak, and the ambient magic of the great hall reacted. Candles flickered. The enchanted ceiling rippled. The house banners on the walls stirred without wind. Mr. Potter, McGonagall said, please sit, Professor McGonagall, Harry said, and his voice carried. Not because he shouted, because the castle carried it for him, amplifying it off the stone walls until it reached every corner of the hall. I need to address the headmaster before the sorting continues. By right of blood and house, I invoke formal grievance. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Dumbledore rose from his chair. His expression was carefully neutral, but Harry could see the gears turning behind those blue eyes. Calculating. Assessing. Trying to determine how much this boy knew and how much was bluster. My dear boy, I am not your dear boy. Harry's voice didn't waver. I am Lord Potter, Lord Black, and Lord Peverell, and you will address me by my titles or not at all. The silence somehow got deeper. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy had gone rigid in his seat. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione's hands were pressed flat against the wood. Neville was watching Harry with something that looked like awe mixed with terror. Dumbledore's eyes dropped to the rings. For the first time, the mask cracked. Just a fissure, a widening of the eyes, a slight parting of the lips, but Harry saw it, and so did everyone else. Those rings. Dumbledore breathed. Recognized by Gringotts. Verified by blood inheritance. Accepted by magic. Harry raised his right hand, and the Potter and Black rings blazed brighter. Shall I tell them what you've done, Headmaster? Or would you like to confess? Harry, I don't know what you've been told, but I assure you, you sealed my parents' will. You placed me with abusive muggles against their explicit written instructions. You stole over 2 million galleons from the Potter family vaults. You bound my magical core when I was 15 months old. And you imprisoned Sirius Black in Azkaban without a trial, despite being the chief warlock of the Wizengamot and having the authority to demand one. Harry's voice was steady and clear and absolutely merciless. Every claim verified by Gringotts. Every document notarized by Goblin law. Copies are being delivered to Amelia Bones as we speak. The great hall erupted. Not in whispers, in noise. Students shouting, gasping, turning to each other in shock. At the staff table, Professor Flitwick had knocked over his goblet. Professor Sprout's mouth was hanging open. Professor Snape was staring at Dumbledore with an expression Harry hadn't expected. Not shock. Recognition. The look of a man who'd always suspected and had just been proven right. McGonagall had gone white. Albus, is this true? Minerva, the situation is far more complex than, is it true? Dumbledore's expression shifted. The grandfatherly warmth drained away like water from a cracked cup, and underneath it was something colder. Harder. The face of the man who defeated Grindelwald, not through kindness, but through the willingness to do what was necessary. Everything I have done, Dumbledore said, I have done for the protection of the wizarding world. The prophecy, you don't get to hide behind a prophecy, Harry cut him off. You don't get to steal a child's gold and bind his magic and throw him in a cupboard and call it protection. That's not the greater good. That's control. You don't understand what's at stake, I understand perfectly. Voldemort isn't dead. Now the great hall really exploded. Students screamed. Several first years burst into tears. Even the ghosts flinched. The name hit the room like a physical blow, and Harry let it land. He's not dead, and you know it, and instead of preparing me, instead of training the one person the prophecy says can stop him, you buried me in a Muggle suburb with people who hated me and made sure I'd arrive at this school weak, ignorant, and grateful. Dependent on you. Loyal to you. A weapon you could aim when the time was right. Harry took a step toward the head table. That ends tonight. Dumbledore's hand moved toward his wand. Harry raised his left hand. The Peverell ring pulsed. I, Harry James Potter, Lord of the Ancient and Most Noble House of Potter, Lord of the Ancient and Most Noble House of Black, Lord of the Most Ancient and Ancestral House of Peverell, do invoke the right of magical stripping against Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore for crimes against my houses and my blood. The air changed. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a shift in pressure, like the moment before a thunderstorm, when the world goes quiet and the hair on your arm stands up. Then the Peverell ring's dark light expanded, pouring off Harry's hand like liquid shadow, spreading across the floor of the great hall in tendrils that moved with purpose and intelligence. Dumbledore grabbed his wand and cast a shield. The strongest shield Harry had ever felt, layers of protective magic stacked so deep they should have stopped anything. The old man was powerful. Legendarily, terrifyingly powerful. But this wasn't a duel. This wasn't spell against spell. This was old magic, the oldest magic, and it didn't care about shields. The dark light passed through Dumbledore's protections like they weren't there. You can't, Dumbledore started, and for the first time, there was fear in his voice. Real fear. The right of stripping is a myth, the goblins disagree. The light reached Dumbledore's feet and climbed. He staggered. His wand hand trembled, and sparks flew from the elder wand. Harry recognized it now, the death stick, the wand of destiny, brother to the stone in his ring, as it tried to fight what was happening. But the elder wand was a Peverell creation. It recognized its master's ring. And it did not resist. The Peverell ring wasn't just stripping Dumbledore's magic. It was reclaiming it. Taking back what had been spent and stolen and misused, unraveling over a century of magical accumulation thread by thread. Harry could feel it flowing through the ring, raw magical power, more than he'd ever imagined one person could hold, and the Peverell ring drank it like water in a desert. Dumbledore screamed. It was a terrible sound. Not a villain's scream, not a monster getting its due, it was the sound of an old man losing the thing that had defined his entire existence. His magic. The gift he'd been born with, the power he'd spent 150 years mastering, the force that had made him the most feared wizard alive. It was being pulled from him like thread from a spindle, and Harry could see it, could see the light leaving Dumbledore's eyes, the color draining from his skin, the wand in his hand going dull and dead and wooden. The elder wand clattered to the floor. Dumbledore fell to his knees. The dark light receded, flowing back into the Peverell ring and vanishing. The great hall was silent except for the old man's ragged breathing. Harry stood 10 feet from the head table, 11 years old, 3 rings blazing on his fingers, and watched Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, supreme mugwump, chief warlock, most powerful wizard of the age, kneel on the stone floor as a squib. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Harry turned to the staff table. Professor McGonagall was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, her face ashen. Professor Snape hadn't moved at all, he sat perfectly still, staring at the fallen headmaster with an expression that was impossible to read. Professor Flitwick, former dueling champion, tiny and brilliant, had tears streaming down his face, though whether from shock or grief or something else entirely, Harry couldn't tell. "The rite of stripping has been invoked and executed," Harry said, and this time his voice was quiet. The castle didn't need to amplify it. Everyone was listening. Under ancient law, Albus Dumbledore's magic is forfeit. He is, from this moment, without magical power. The charges against him are documented and will be prosecuted through the Wisengamot. Copies of all evidence have been delivered to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He looked at Dumbledore. The old man raised his head. His eyes, those famous blue eyes, were dull now. Faded. Like someone had turned off a light behind stained glass. But he wasn't broken. Even now, even kneeling on the floor without a shred of magic, Albus Dumbledore's mind was working. Harry could see it in the set of his jaw. "You have no idea," Dumbledore whispered, "what you've just done. I've done what my parents would have wanted. I've held you accountable. You've exposed the wizarding world. Without me, without my power, the protections I've maintained, your protections were chains. Your wards were compulsions. And your legacy, headmaster, is a generation of children shaped by your manipulations instead of their own choices." Harry let that land. "The wizarding world will survive without you. It survived before you, and it'll survive after." He turned back to McGonagall. "Professor. As deputy headmistress, I believe authority of the school falls to you in the headmaster's absence." McGonagall stared at him. Then, with the particular Scottish steel that had made her a legend in her own right, she straightened her spine and nodded once. "Mr. Potter is correct. As deputy headmistress, I am assuming emergency authority over Hogwarts School." Her voice was tight but steady. She looked at the staff table. "Phileas, Pomona, please escort Albus to the hospital wing. Severus, send a Patronus to Amelia Bones. The rest of the sorting will continue." Nobody argued with McGonagall. Flitwick and Sprout moved to Dumbledore's sides, helping the now frail man to his feet. He seemed to have aged decades in moments, without magic sustaining him, his body was remembering that it was 110 years old. They half carried him through the side door behind the staff table, and Harry watched him go. He didn't feel triumphant. He'd expected to, somewhere in the back of his mind. But watching an old man lose everything, even an old man who deserved it, wasn't a cause for celebration. It was necessary. It was just. But it wasn't fun. Snape rose from his seat, wand out, and cast a silver doe Patronus that bounded from the hall so fast it left an afterimage. Then he sat back down and poured himself a very large goblet of wine. The great hall was still frozen. 400 students, dozens of ghosts, a staff of professors, all staring at the 11-year-old boy standing in the middle of the room with 3 glowing rings and the sorting hat still on his head. The hat spoke into the silence. "Well," it said, its voice carrying through the hall, "that was the most exciting sorting I've had in 900 years. And I believe we have a placement to make." A long pause. "Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, I've had time to think about this. You asked me to put you where I thought was right. So here it is." Harry waited. You have the courage of Godric, the ambition of Salazar, the wisdom of Rowena, and the loyalty of Helga. You're the most balanced student I've ever sorted. You could change any house you entered. Another pause, and Harry could swear the hat was smiling. But only one house needs changing. Slytherin. The word exploded through the great hall like a second thunderbolt. The Slytherin table went rigid. The Gryffindor table gasped. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the defeater of Voldemort, the lord of 3 noble houses who had just publicly destroyed Albus Dumbledore, was going to the House of the Snakes. Harry took off the sorting hat, set it neatly on the stool, and walked toward the Slytherin table. The students parted for him like water. He walked the length of the table until he reached the far end, where Draco Malfoy sat with his jaw hanging somewhere near his collar. Harry dropped into the seat across from him. "You told me not to interfere," Draco said faintly. "I thought you meant, I don't know what I thought." "Now you know. You just destroyed Dumbledore. I just held him accountable. There's a difference." Harry reached for a goblet and poured himself pumpkin juice. His hands, he noticed, were perfectly steady. "How's the food here?" Draco stared at him for a long, long moment. Then something cracked in his expression, not his composure, but the mask underneath it, the one his father had given him. And Draco Malfoy, for possibly the first time in his life, laughed. A real laugh, startled and genuine and a little bit wild. "You're completely mad," Draco said. "Probably. You just stripped the most powerful wizard alive of his magic during the sorting feast. The food hasn't even arrived yet. Technically it was before the feast." Draco shook his head. "And they put you in Slytherin. The hat seemed to think you lot needed shaking up." At the staff table, McGonagall was calling the next name on the sorting list with the determined calm of a woman who was absolutely going to process this later, possibly with a bottle of fire whiskey, but who would get through the ceremony first if it killed her. Hogwarts rumbled on. The candles burned. The enchanted ceiling showed stars. At the Gryffindor table, Neville caught Harry's eye across the hall and raised his goblet in a tiny, private toast. Beside him, Hermione was already scribbling furiously on a napkin, taking notes on everything she'd just witnessed. Down the Slytherin table, older students were whispering, studying Harry with expressions that ranged from shock to grudging respect to careful, calculating interest. A dark-haired girl a few years older than Harry, he thought she might be one of the Greengrass sisters, was watching him with an intensity that suggested she was re-evaluating every assumption she'd made about her evening. And in the hospital wing, a man without magic stared at the ceiling and began to plan. Harry sipped his pumpkin juice and waited for the feast to begin. The Peverell ring hummed warm against his finger. The castle whispered welcome. The war had started. Later, after the feast, after the prefects led them down into the dungeons, after Harry had been shown to a dormitory that was actually quite pleasant in a subterranean sort of way, with its green-tinged light filtering through the lake water and its heavy four-poster beds, Harry lay in the darkness and listened to the other boys sleep. Draco was in the bed to his left, breathing evenly. Blaise Zabini, who'd barely spoken during the feast but had watched Harry with cool, appraising eyes, was on his right. Theodore Nott was across the room. Crabbe and Goyle were already snoring. Harry held up his left hand in the dark. The Peverell ring didn't glow, it didn't need to. He could feel the stolen magic humming inside it, Dumbledore's century of accumulated power absorbed and waiting. The sorting hat had told him about the compulsions in the wards. That was a problem. The wards were tied to the headmaster's authority, which was now in flux. McGonagall could maintain them, but she couldn't modify them, not without understanding what Dumbledore had done. But Harry could. The Peverell ring gave him access to the foundation stones, the original ward anchors laid by the founders themselves. He could strip Dumbledore's modifications. He could restore the wards to their original configuration. He could set Hogwarts free. Not tonight. Tonight he was tired, and tomorrow was going to be very, very interesting. The ministry would come. The press would come. The Wisengamot would convene. And somewhere in this castle, there was a third-floor corridor that Dumbledore had gone to great lengths to protect, hiding something that Harry suspected was far more important than anyone realized. But all of that was tomorrow. Tonight, Harry Potter lay in his bed in the Slytherin dungeons, wearing 3 rings that carried the weight of 1,000 years, and allowed himself to feel something he'd never felt before. Not triumph. Not anger. Not fear. Belonging. The castle hummed around him, old and vast and alive, and for the first time in his 11 years, Harry Potter was exactly where he was supposed to be. He closed his eyes. He slept without dreaming. Chapter 2, The Aftermath. Harry woke to the sound of water. Not a drip or a leak, the deep, rhythmic pressure of the Black Lake pressing against the dormitory walls, a sound like breathing. Green-tinged light filtered through the enchanted windows, casting the room in shifting, aquatic shadows that moved across the ceiling like something alive. For 3 disoriented seconds, Harry thought he was still dreaming. Then the Peverell ring pulsed against his finger, warm and steady as a heartbeat, and everything from the night before came rushing back. He lay still and listened. The other boys were asleep. Draco's breathing was precise and even, the sleep of someone trained from childhood to be composed, even unconscious. Blaise Zabini didn't make a sound. Theodore not muttered something indistinct and rolled over. Crabbe and Goyle snored in a duet that could have stripped paint. Harry sat up, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and pulled on his clothes in the dark. His trunk, unshrunk and properly stowed by the house elves, sat at the foot of his bed. He'd packed carefully. Not just robes and textbooks but the full evidence portfolio from Gringotts, copied 3 times. 1 for Amelia Bones. 1 for the Wisengamot records. 1 for himself. He slipped out of the dormitory and into the Slytherin common room. It was beautiful down here, in the grey pre-dawn. The common room was all dark stone and deep green leather, with a massive fireplace carved into the wall and tall windows that looked directly into the lake. Something large and tentacle drifted past one of the windows as Harry crossed to an armchair by the fire, and he watched it go with the detached interest of someone who'd spent the past 3 weeks having stranger experiences than giant squid sightings. He had maybe an hour before the castle woke. He used it. The Potter ring warmed on his finger as he closed his eyes and sank into the memory archive. Not the old memories tonight, not Charles or Fleamont or the ancient lords. Tonight he reached for his father. James Potter's memories were fragmented. He'd only had time to store impressions, quick, desperate uploads to the ring in the hours before Voldemort came. But what was there was vivid. A flash of Lily's face, fierce and beautiful, red hair catching firelight as she argued with someone Harry couldn't see. The weight of a baby, of Harry, in James's arms, so small and warm. And then a conversation, urgent and hushed, James and Lily bent over a table covered in parchment. He can't be trusted, James. The prophecy, he's using it. He's using Harry. I know. That's why we changed the will. McGonagall and Alice will, it's not enough. If something happens to us, nothing's going to happen. If something happens to us, Sirius takes Harry and runs. That's the plan. He runs and he doesn't stop until there's somewhere Dumbledore can't reach. A pause. James's voice, lower now, stripped of its usual confidence, and if Sirius can't, then we'd better hope our son is stronger than we are. Harry opened his eyes. The fire had burned low. His cheeks were wet. He wiped his face with his sleeve and breathed until the tightness in his chest loosened. Then he straightened up, because he could hear footsteps on the dormitory stairs. Blaise Zabini emerged into the common room like a cat, silent, unhurried, instantly alert. He was already fully dressed, his dark skin and high cheekbones making him look older than 11. He saw Harry and stopped. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep. After last night? I'm surprised you slept at all." Blaise crossed to the opposite armchair and sat with an elegance that seemed entirely unconscious. Half the school thinks you're a Dark Lord. The other half thinks you're a hero. Both are wrong, I suspect. What do you think? I think you're someone who had information and the will to act on it. That's rarer than either Dark Lords or heroes. Blaise studied him. My mother told me about the rite of stripping. She's collected enough husbands to be something of an expert on obscure magical law. I thought she was exaggerating. She wasn't. No. She wasn't. Blaise tilted his head. I'm not going to swear fealty or pledge my undying loyalty or whatever it is people do in situations like this. But I'd like to be your friend, Potter. And in Slytherin, that means something specific. It means mutual benefit. Eyes and ears. Honest counsel, even when it's unpleasant. Something like approval flickered across Blaise's face. The goblins taught you well. The goblins taught me everything Dumbledore didn't want me to know. Which was most things. Harry stood. Breakfast? It's 5:30 in the morning. I'm starving. And I want to see the Great Hall before the circus arrives. They walked the dungeon corridors together. Hogwarts was different at dawn, quieter, vaster, the torches burned down to embers so that the stone halls were lit by the pale grey light that crept through the high windows. Harry could feel the castle's magic more clearly now, without the noise of hundreds of students muddying the signal. The wards hummed around him, ancient and layered, and, he could feel this now, corrupted. Dumbledore's modifications were everywhere. Not just in the broad strokes the Sorting Hat had described, but in thousands of tiny, subtle adjustments that had accumulated over decades. Compulsion threads woven into the staircases that subtly discouraged Slytherin students from lingering in common areas. Mood-altering charms in the library that made students more compliant. A network of monitoring spells tied to the headmaster's office that tracked the location and emotional state of every student in the castle. Harry's skin crawled. You can feel it, Blaise said, watching his face. The wards. They're wrong. Tampered with. Blaise didn't ask how Harry could sense them. He simply nodded. My mother always said the castle felt different from when she attended. She thought she was imagining it. She wasn't. They reached the Great Hall. It was empty at this hour, the 4 house tables gleaming in the early light, the enchanted ceiling showing the pearly grey of a Scottish dawn. Harry walked not to the Slytherin table but to the center of the hall, where the ancient flagstones were largest and oldest. He knelt and pressed his hand flat against the stone. The Peverell ring blazed. The response was immediate. Harry felt the castle's magic surge up through the floor and into his hand like a greeting, a recognition, a plea. Hogwarts was ancient and alive in a way that wasn't quite sentient but was far more than inert, a vast, sleeping awareness that had been prodded and twisted and constrained for decades and was desperate for someone who could hear it. Harry heard it. Show me, he thought. The castle showed him. Not in images or words, but in feelings, a map of magical flows and ward structures that bloomed in his mind like a flower unfolding. He could see the original framework, beautiful and elegant, the work of 4 of the greatest magical minds in history. And he could see Dumbledore's additions, crude by comparison, parasitic, leeching off the founder's work to power the old man's surveillance network and behavioral modifications. Harry took a breath and began to pull. It was like pulling weeds from a garden. Each of Dumbledore's additions was rooted into the original ward structure, tangled around healthy magic, drawing sustenance from the castle's core. Harry worked carefully, using the Peverell ring's authority to identify foreign magic and the Potter ring's stored knowledge, generations of ward crafters and cursebreakers, to separate Dumbledore's work from the founder's without damaging either. It took 40 minutes. When he was done, the castle shuddered. This time it was physical. The flagstones vibrated. The candle brackets rattled. Dust fell from the ceiling in fine grey curtains. And then Hogwarts settled, the magical flows smoothing and brightening and running clean for the first time in decades, and the enchanted ceiling blazed with sudden, brilliant sunlight that turned the whole great hall to gold. Blaise had retreated to the Slytherin table and was gripping it with both hands. What did you just do? Took out the trash. Harry stood, dusting off his knees. The castle wards are clean. Dumbledore's modifications are gone. Every compulsion, every surveillance spell, every behavioral nudge, all of it. You just rewrote the wards of Hogwarts. At 5 in the morning. Before breakfast. Harry walked to the Slytherin table and sat down. I'm very motivated on an empty stomach. A house elf appeared with a crack, a tiny creature in a clean tea towel emblazoned with the Hogwarts crest. It stared at Harry with eyes the size of tennis balls, trembling with what looked like barely contained emotion. Lord Peverell, sir, it whispered. The castle is singing, sir. We hasn't heard her sing in so long. What's your name? Mipsy, sir. Mipsy, could we get some breakfast? Whatever's easy. Mipsy disappeared and reappeared 40 seconds later with a spread that could have fed a small village: eggs, bacon, toast, kippers, porridge, fruit, pastries, 3 kinds of juice, and a pot of tea so large it needed its own table. Harry raised his eyebrows. The castle is grateful, sir, Mipsy said, and vanished with a crack that sounded almost joyful. The elves feel it too? Blaise asked, staring at the mountain of food. The house elves are bonded to the castle. When the castle's magic runs clean, they're happier and healthier. Dumbledore's modifications were hurting them along with everyone else. Harry loaded his plate. Eat. It's going to be a long day. They were halfway through breakfast when the great hall doors opened and Draco walked in. He looked immaculate, as always, not a hair out of place, robes pressed and perfect, the Malfoy signet ring catching the light. But his eyes were sharp and alert and slightly wild, and he made a beeline for Harry's section of the table. Something happened to the wards, Draco said without preamble, dropping into the seat beside Blaise. I felt it in the dormitory. The whole common room changed, the air tastes different. That was Harry, Blaise said, pouring himself more tea. Draco turned to stare at Harry. You touched the castle wards. I cleaned them. Harry pushed a plate of toast toward Draco. Dumbledore had been modifying them for decades. Compulsions, surveillance, behavioral adjustments on every student who entered the castle. It's all gone now. Draco sat very still. Compulsions affecting students. Every student. But Slytherin got the worst of it. The wards were designed to push Slytherin students toward isolation and aggression. Make you paranoid. Keep you separate from the other houses. Harry met Draco's eyes. Every nasty impulse, every cruel comment, every time a Slytherin student decided to pick a fight instead of make a friend, some of that was Dumbledore's wards whispering in your ear. Draco's face went through several complex expressions in rapid succession. Shock first, then fury, then something colder and more controlled that settled over his features like a mask being lowered, but not the old mask, not his father's mask. This was something new. Something Draco was building for himself. He was farming dark wizards, Draco said quietly. Harry paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. That was sharper than he'd expected. What? Think about it. If you take a quarter of the student body, the ambitious ones, the cunning ones, the ones from old families with old magic, and you spend 7 years nudging them toward darkness, isolating them, making them hostile and paranoid, what do you get? Dark wizards. Dark families. An enemy for the light side to fight against. Draco's voice was ice. He needed Slytherin to be villains. It justified his power. That's. Harry set down his fork. I hadn't thought of it that way. You thought like a Gryffindor. You saw the injustice. I'm seeing the strategy. Draco reached for the toast. My father always said Dumbledore was the most dangerous man in Britain. I thought he meant magically. Your father wasn't wrong. He just wasn't right for the reasons he thought. They ate in waited silence for a few minutes. Other students began trickling in, first in ones and twos, then in larger groups, and every single one of them stared at Harry as they entered the hall. The whispers started immediately. Harry ignored them. He'd been stared at since he walked into the leaky cauldron for the first time, and he suspected he'd be stared at for the rest of his life. Might as well eat while it happened. Hermione arrived at 7:15, practically vibrating with energy. She marched straight to the Slytherin table, which drew stares from every corner of the room, and sat down across from Harry without asking. "You can't just sit at another house's table," Draco said. "Watch me." Hermione slapped a roll of parchment on the table. "I've been up since 5 writing a summary of every law that applies to what happened last night. There are 17 statutes, 4 Wisengamot precedents, and 2 International Confederation rulings that are relevant." Harry looked at the parchment. It was covered in Hermione's tiny, precise handwriting. "You did this in 2 hours. 2.5. The Hogwarts library doesn't open until 6, so I had to work from my own books first and then cross-reference." "Granger," Blaise said, with something that might have been admiration, "you're terrifying." "Thank you." She didn't even look up. "Harry, the most important precedent is the Blackwood case of 1743. Lord Blackwood invoked the right of stripping against the Minister of Magic for illegal seizure of Blackwood assets. The Wisengamot ruled in Blackwood's favor and upheld the stripping. The key detail is that the Wisengamot explicitly ruled that the right of stripping is self-executing, it doesn't require ministry approval or judicial review. Once the conditions are met and the magic accepts the invocation, it's done. It can't be reversed. Which means Dumbledore's allies in the ministry can't legislate his magic back, Harry said. Exactly. They can try to charge you with assault or dark magic usage, but the precedent is clear, the right of stripping is a house prerogative under ancient law, and ancient law supersedes ministry statute. Fudge won't care about precedent, Draco said. He'll care about optics. An 11-year-old boy just destroyed the most beloved figure in the wizarding world. The prophet will run whatever story the ministry feeds them. Which is why we have Amelia Bones. Harry pulled the evidence portfolio from inside his robes. The goblins delivered copies to her office last night. Bones is head of the DMLE and she's incorruptible, or as close to it as anyone in the ministry gets. She'll investigate. She's also my friend Susan's aunt, Neville said. Harry turned. Neville had appeared at the edge of the Slytherin table, looking uncomfortable but determined. Behind him, a few Gryffindor students were watching with expressions of horror at the cross-house fraternization. Sit down, Neville. Won't that cause problems? I just stripped the headmaster of his magic during the sorting. I think we're past worrying about table assignments. Neville sat. They'd barely settled into a working rhythm, Hermione's legal research, Draco's political analysis, Blaise's commentary, and Neville's quiet steadiness, when the owl post arrived. It came like a feathered avalanche. Hundreds of owls flooding through the upper windows, more than Harry had ever seen, and at least a third of them were heading for him. Letters and parcels and rolled newspapers piled up in front of his plate until he couldn't see his eggs. The first letter he opened was from the Daily Prophet, requesting an exclusive interview. The second was from the ministry, demanding he present himself for questioning. The third was from Lucius Malfoy, written in an elegant hand, requesting the honor of a private audience with Lord Potter-Black-Peverell at his earliest convenience. Your father moves fast, Harry said, sliding the letter across to Draco. Draco read it, and something complicated moved behind his eyes. He's going to try to ally with you. The Malfoy family has been looking for a new power center since the Dark Lord fell. If you're as powerful as you seem, I am. Then my father will want to be your friend. Or appear to be. I know. Harry stacked the letters neatly and moved them aside. I'll deal with him later. Right now, I want to see what the prophet is saying. Hermione already had a copy spread out on the table. The front page was exactly what Harry expected. Boy who lived attacks Dumbledore at Hogwarts. Sorting Potter claims ancient house rights. Headmaster stripped of magic in shocking display. The article was written by someone named Rita Skeeter, and it was breathlessly sensational, factually questionable, and almost entirely focused on Harry as a potential dark wizard. Dumbledore was portrayed as a beloved institution, who had been viciously assaulted by a disturbed child clearly influenced by dark forces. There was no mention of the evidence, the sealed will, the stolen vaults, or the core binding. That's libel, Hermione said flatly. That's the prophet, Draco corrected. Skeeter writes what sells, and dark child attacks kindly grandfather sells better than corrupt official faces consequences. Father's probably already sent his talking points to the editor. Let them write what they want, Harry said. The evidence speaks for itself. When Bones's investigation goes public, the prophet will have to cover it. Unless Fudge buries the investigation. He won't. Not with Goblin-verified evidence. The Goblins consider forged documentation a capital offense. They'll go to war before they let anyone question their notarization. And Fudge is afraid of the Goblins. Everyone's afraid of the Goblins, Blaise said mildly. The Morning Post brought one more letter that Harry hadn't expected. It bore the Hogwarts crest and was written in McGonagall's sharp, angular hand. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, you are requested to attend a meeting in the headmaster's, acting headmistress's, office at 9 o'clock this morning. Madam Amelia Bones and representatives from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement will be present. As this meeting concerns legal matters relating to your house claims, you are entitled to bring representation. Professor M. McGonagall acting headmistress, 9 o'clock, Harry said. That gives me an hour. You need a solicitor, Hermione said immediately. I have one. Gringotts retained a goblin legal advocate on my behalf. He should be arriving by flu any moment. As if on cue, the fire in the Slytherin common room probably wasn't connected to the network. But Harry wasn't worried. Goblin advocates had a way of showing up. I want to come, Neville said. Harry looked at him. Neville's jaw was set, his hands steady. The boy who'd been told he was almost a squib, who'd been thrown out of windows and mocked for his magic, sitting at the Slytherin table surrounded by people who should have been his enemies, asking to walk into a ministry investigation because his friend needed him. Yeah, Harry said. I'd like that. Me too, Hermione said, already rolling up her parchment. Granger, you're not even in his house, Draco said. I'm his legal researcher. Try to stop me. Draco looked at Harry with an expression that said, quite clearly, where did you find these people? Harry grinned. The acting headmistress's office was still full of Dumbledore's things. His silver instruments still whirred and clicked on their spindly tables. His phoenix, Fawkes, sat on a golden perch and watched Harry enter with eyes like burning coals. The portraits of former headmasters lined the walls, and every single one of them was awake and staring. McGonagall sat behind the desk with the stiff posture of someone who was holding herself together through sheer force of will. To her left stood Amelia Bones, a square-jawed, formidable woman in ministry robes, her monocle glinting in the morning light. Two Aurors flanked the door, a tall, bald black man Harry recognized from the files as Kingsley Shacklebolt, and a young woman with bubblegum pink hair who was trying very hard to look professional and mostly failing. And in the corner, silent and watchful, Severus Snape. Harry entered with Neville and Hermione at his flanks. A goblin in a three-piece suit of dark grey silk followed, Ragnarok the Younger, Gringotts' foremost legal advocate, whose teeth had been filed to points not for aesthetic reasons but because he'd bitten a ministry official in 1987 and wanted to be prepared in case it happened again. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, Bones said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had spent the night reading very disturbing documents and had not slept. Thank you for coming. Madam Bones. Harry took the chair that had been set out for him and sat without waiting to be invited. Ragnarok stood at his shoulder. Neville and Hermione took positions by the wall, and Harry saw McGonagall's eyebrows rise a fraction at the sight of a Gryffindor boy and a Gryffindor girl standing guard for a Slytherin lord. I assume you've reviewed the evidence portfolio? I have. Bones removed her monocle, polished it, and replaced it, a gesture that Harry suspected was habitual and calming. I've spent the last 12 hours reviewing it. I've also spoken with Gringotts, who have confirmed the authenticity of every document. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, I want to be direct with you. The evidence against Albus Dumbledore is comprehensive and damning. If everything in this portfolio is accurate, and the Goblin notarization suggests it is, then Dumbledore has committed multiple criminal offenses against your houses. That's why I did what I did. What you did, Bones said carefully, was invoke an ancient magical rite that most of the Ministry doesn't believe exists. In front of 400 witnesses. To a man who, despite whatever he may have done, is regarded as the greatest wizard of our age. You understand the position this puts me in? I understand the position Dumbledore put you in. I just made it visible. Bones studied him for a long moment. Then, very faintly, one corner of her mouth twitched. The Potters were always direct. My legal advocate can walk you through the formal charges, Harry said, nodding to Ragnarok. But before we get into that, there are a few things you need to know that aren't in the portfolio. He told her about the wards. About the compulsions woven into the castle, the behavioral modifications affecting every student, the surveillance network tied to the headmaster's office. He told her he'd removed them that morning. The room went very quiet. You modified the Hogwarts wards, Bones said. This morning. I restored them. The Peverell bloodline has authority over the castle's foundation wards. The Peverells helped build Hogwarts. What Dumbledore added was parasitic. I removed it and let the original ward structure reassert itself. Can you prove the modifications existed? The Sorting Hat can testify. It's been aware of the compulsions for decades and has been unable to act because it can only speak during sortings. The House Elves can testify, they felt the change this morning. And Professor Flitwick, as the school's charms master, should be able to detect the residual signatures of removed enchantments. Harry paused. I'd also suggest having Madame Pomfrey examine students for long-term compulsion damage. The effects were subtle but persistent. McGonagall made a sound like she'd been punched. Harry looked at her and saw a woman coming face to face with the realization that the man she'd trusted for 40 years had been manipulating children under her care. Minerva, Bones said gently. Don't. McGonagall's voice was steel wrapped in broken glass. Don't gentle me, Amelia. I spent 40 years in this castle. I taught thousands of students. And I never, she stopped. Breathed. I never noticed. The compulsions were designed not to be noticed, Harry said. That's the point. Dumbledore was, possibly the most skilled wizard of the century. If he didn't want you to see something, you wouldn't see it. That doesn't excuse, no. It doesn't. But it explains. Harry held her gaze. Professor, my parents named you as their tertiary guardian. They trusted you. I'd like to trust you too. But I need to know whose side you're on. The portraits on the walls were absolutely silent. Even Phineas Nigellus Black, who usually had something snide to say about everything, was watching with his mouth shut. McGonagall stood up from behind the desk. She walked around it until she was standing in front of Harry, looking down at him with eyes that were bright and fierce and wet. I am on the side of my students, she said. Always. And if what you're telling me is true, and I believe it is, then I have failed them. I will not fail them again. Harry nodded. Then we have a lot of work to do. Ragnarok stepped forward and began the formal legal presentation with the efficiency and ruthlessness that made Goblin advocates the most feared legal professionals in the magical world. He laid out each charge with supporting evidence, cross-referenced with Wisengamot precedent, and delivered it all in a tone of voice that suggested he was personally offended by the shoddy quality of Dumbledore's financial fraud. The charges were, theft of House Potter assets totaling 2.3 million galleons over 10 years. Illegal seizure and placement of the Potter heir against the explicit provisions of a sealed will. Magical assault, core binding, against a minor of noble house. Conspiracy to deny trial to Sirius Orion Black, Lord Black by right, imprisoned in Azkaban since November 1981 without arraignment or hearing. Abuse of the office of Chief Warlock to seal legal documents. Unauthorized modification of Hogwarts wards for the purpose of student manipulation. Bones took notes throughout, her quick quotes quill scratching furiously across parchment. When Ragnarok finished, she sat back and let out a long, slow breath. "I'm going to need to interview Dumbledore," she said. "And I'm going to need to move on the Sirius Black matter immediately." "If Black was denied a trial, he was," Harry said. "And I want him freed. That's not something I can guarantee. It's something I can demand. As Lord Black, Sirius is my vassal and my blood. His imprisonment without trial is a violation of House Black's rights under the Wisengamot Charter. If the Ministry doesn't act, I'll take it to the International Confederation." Bones looked at him. He could see her recalculating, adjusting her mental model of who she was dealing with. Not a child. Not a puppet. Something else entirely. "I'll push for an emergency hearing within the week," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Bones stood and gathered her files. "Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, I want to be honest with you. Minister Fudge is not going to be happy about any of this. Dumbledore has allies throughout the Ministry, and Fudge personally depends on Dumbledore's reputation to legitimize his own administration. There will be pushback. There will be attempts to discredit you, delay the investigation, and possibly reverse what you've done. They can't reverse the stripping. The Blackwood precedent, I know. But they can make your life very difficult in other ways. Be careful." "I'm always careful, Madam Bones." Harry smiled. "I'm just not quiet about it." Bones left with her Aurors. The pink-haired one, Tonks, someone called her, tripped over the doorframe on her way out and turned her hair bright red with embarrassment, which was either accidental magic or something far more interesting. McGonagall excused herself to begin the process of having students examined for compulsion damage, moving with the determined speed of a woman who had found her purpose. That left Harry, his friends, Ragnarok, and Snape. The potions master hadn't said a word during the entire meeting. He sat in his corner like a black-robed shadow, arms crossed, dark eyes unreadable. But he hadn't left, and in Harry's experience, Severus Snape didn't waste time on things that didn't interest him. "Professor," Harry said. Snape's lip curled. It seemed like a reflexive gesture, a sneer worn so long it had become a tic. "Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. Your father would have loved this. A grand performance, maximum spectacle, the whole school as his audience. Maybe. But my father didn't have the evidence. I do." Something flickered in Snape's eyes. Not the hostility Harry had expected, something more complicated. "Your mother," Snape said, and his voice changed on the word, dropping its cutting edge, becoming almost careful, would have done it differently. She would have destroyed Dumbledore quietly. Methodically. Without anyone knowing until it was too late. I know. But quiet and methodical takes time, and I don't have time. Dumbledore's had 10 years to build his web. I needed to cut through it, not untangle it. Reckless. Effective. Snape unfolded from his chair and stood. He was tall and lean and carried himself like a blade, all angles and edges, nothing wasted. He looked at Harry for a long time, and Harry let him look. "Dumbledore told me," Snape said slowly, "that your mother's sacrifice created the blood protection that kept you safe at the Dursleys. That was why you had to stay. That was the reason for everything, the placement, the secrecy, the..." He paused. "The conditions. That's what he told you. Was it true?" "Partially. The blood protection was real. But it could have been maintained through any blood relative of my mother, not just Petunia. A simple ritual, performed annually, could have anchored the protection anywhere. Dumbledore chose the Dursleys specifically. The protection was an excuse, not a reason. Snape went very still. The kind of still that preceded either violence or revelation. He chose them because they would mistreat you. He chose them because they would keep me small. Afraid. Desperate for approval. So that when I finally arrived at Hogwarts, I'd be so grateful and so overwhelmed that I'd follow anyone who showed me kindness. Harry kept his voice even. Anyone like a kind, grandfatherly headmaster who offered me lemon drops and called me, my boy. Snape's hands clenched at his sides. I knew, he said, and the admission sounded like it was being dragged out of him by hooks. Not the details. Not the scope. But I knew something was wrong. The way he spoke about you, like an asset, not a child. I told myself it was for the greater good. I told myself Lily would understand. Would she? No. The word was barely a whisper. She would have burned him alive. Then we have that in common. Harry stood and held out his hand. I'm not my father, Professor. And I'm not going to pretend I don't know how you felt about my mother. But I need a potions master I can trust, and you need to decide whether your grudge against a dead man is more important than doing right by his son. Snape stared at Harry's outstretched hand like it was a live snake. The silence stretched long enough that Neville shifted uncomfortably and Hermione held her breath. Then Snape reached out and shook it. Once. Firm. I won't be kind, Snape said. I don't need kind. I need honest. Then we'll get along. Snape released his hand and swept toward the door. He paused at the threshold. The core binding Dumbledore placed on you, it should be removed properly. I have some expertise in magical suppression. Come to my office tonight. Bring Longbottom. He was gone before Harry could respond, black robes billowing behind him like a personal storm system. Neville let out a shaky breath. Did Snape just offer to help? I think he did, Hermione said, sounding as stunned as Neville looked. Harry turned to Ragnarok. How did we do? The Goblin Advocate smiled his pointed smile. Bones is competent and honest. She'll follow the evidence. The fudge problem is manageable. And Snape. Ragnarok tilted his head. Snape is interesting. He's been Dumbledore's creature for a decade, but the leash just snapped. A free Snape could be very useful or very dangerous. I'll take both, Harry said. The rest of the morning was class schedules and controlled chaos. McGonagall, operating with the ruthless efficiency of a woman who'd had her world shattered and had decided to reassemble it properly, issued new timetables by 9:30, announced that all classes would proceed as normal, and gave a brief speech in the Great Hall that managed to acknowledge the previous night's events without actually explaining anything. It was a masterclass in saying nothing with authority. Harry's first class was potions with the Gryffindors. Walking into the dungeon classroom felt different now that Harry had shaken Snape's hand. The other Slytherin first-years flanked him, Draco to his left, Blaise to his right, Theo not trailing behind with the quiet watchfulness of a boy who preferred to observe. The Gryffindors were already seated, and Harry caught Neville's eye across the room. Snape swept in and the room went silent. He delivered his opening speech, the Bottle Fame, Brew Glory, Stopper Death monologue, with the theatrical intensity of a man who'd been rehearsing it for years. His dark eyes swept the room and landed on Harry. Potter. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The old Harry, the Harry Dumbledore had designed, would have stammered. Would have flushed. Would have been humiliated in front of the class. The draught of living death, Harry said calmly. A sleeping potion so powerful that a single drop can put a person into a death-like trance. The antidote is the Wiggenweld potion, which requires, that will do, Snape said, and something that was almost a smile crossed his face before being strangled to death by decades of habit. 5 points to Slytherin. Hermione, who'd had her hand up since before the question was asked, slowly lowered it with a look of mingled admiration and frustration. The class proceeded without incident. Snape was still sharp, still demanding, still cutting in his criticisms, but the cruelty was dialed back. When Neville nearly melted his cauldron, Snape didn't mock him. He simply said, "Longbottom, clockwise, not counterclockwise," and moved on. The difference was so jarring that several Gryffindor students exchanged disbelieving looks. After class, Harry lingered. Snape looked up from his desk. "Tonight. 8 o'clock. Don't be late." "We won't be." Harry, Neville, and Hermione walked the dungeon corridors back toward the main castle. The walls down here were damp and ancient, the torches guttering in a draft that came from somewhere deep below. Harry could feel something, a faint pulse in the Peverell ring, a tug toward the lower levels of the castle. He filed it away for later. The afternoon brought Transfiguration with McGonagall, who taught with a precision and passion that made it immediately clear why she was considered one of the best in the world. She turned her desk into a pig and back, gave them matchstick-to-needle assignments, and treated Harry exactly as she treated every other student, firmly, fairly, and without a shred of special treatment. Harry appreciated that more than he could express. He turned his matchstick into a needle on the first try. Not because he was showing off, but because the Potter ring's memory archive included 4 generations of Transfiguration prodigies, and converting the knowledge into practice turned out to be startlingly easy once his magic could actually flow freely. The binding on his core was still in place. Snape was going to help with that tonight, but even suppressed, Harry's magic was responding to the ring's influence with eager enthusiasm. McGonagall looked at his perfect needle, looked at him, and nodded once. "Well done, Lord Potter-Black-Peverell. Just Harry in class, Professor. If that's all right." Another nod, fractionally warmer. "Well done, Harry." Hermione turned her matchstick into a needle 3 tries later and spent the rest of class practically glowing. Neville struggled, but Harry leaned over between attempts and said quietly, "Don't force it. The magic wants to work. Just let it flow." Neville closed his eyes. Took a breath. And the matchstick shimmered, not a full transformation, but the tip turned silver and sharp. "Progress," Harry said. Neville grinned. At 8 o'clock, Harry and Neville descended to Snape's office in the dungeons. The room was exactly what Harry expected: shelves of jarred specimens, a desk covered in parchment, a fireplace that gave off minimal light and maximum atmosphere. Snape was waiting with his sleeves rolled up and an expression that said he'd rather be doing almost anything else but was going to do this anyway. "Sit," Snape said, pointing to a clear space on the floor. "Both of you." They sat. Snape knelt in front of Harry and held out his wand. "I'm going to scan your magical core. It will feel invasive. Don't resist." Harry nodded. Snape's wand traced a complex pattern over Harry's chest, and warmth spread through his body, a deep, searching warmth that reached into places Harry hadn't known existed. He felt the binding light up in his awareness, a dark, tight knot wrapped around something vast and bright. "Merlin," Snape breathed. "That bad? That large? Your core is." "Potter, the suppressed core alone would make you above average. What's underneath the binding is extraordinary." Snape's eyes were sharp with professional fascination. 3 layers, as the goblin said. Blood tied, signature tied, emotion tied. The emotion layer is the worst. It's been tightening for a decade. It must have been excruciating every time you used accidental magic. "It was," Harry said simply. Snape was quiet for a moment. "Then, I'm going to remove it. It will hurt. Do it." The process took an hour. Snape worked with surgical precision, his wand tracing the binding threads and dissolving them one at a time, the blood binding first, which broke with a snap Harry felt in his teeth, then the signature binding, which unraveled slowly, like pulling a thread from a sweater, and finally the emotion binding, which fought back. Harry's magic surged as the last layer weakened. The office shook. Bottles rattled on shelves. The fire roared and turned blue, then white, then a color Harry had never seen. Snape braced himself and kept working, sweat beading on his forehead, his wand hand steady even as the ambient magic in the room spiked to dangerous levels. The binding broke. The release was, there wasn't a word for it. Harry's magic flooded through him like a dam bursting, rushing into spaces that had been empty for 10 years, filling him up from his fingertips to his core. The 3 rings blazed in unison. The Peverell ring absorbed the surge and channeled it, preventing the raw magic from destroying the room, and Harry felt himself settle into his full power for the first time in his life. It was like being blind and suddenly seeing. Like being underwater and finally breaking the surface. Every color was brighter. Every sound was clearer. He could feel the castle around him, the wards humming in recognition, the ancient stones singing with magic that resonated with his own. Bloody hell, Neville whispered. Harry opened his eyes. He hadn't realized he'd closed them. The office was intact, barely. Several jars had cracked, and the fire was still burning an unusual color. Snape was sitting back on his heels, staring at Harry with an expression of undisguised shock. "What?" Harry asked. "Your eyes," Snape said. "They're glowing." Harry reached up and touched his face. He couldn't see it himself, but he could feel it, his magic, running so close to the surface that it was literally visible. Green light, his mother's green, burning behind his irises. "It'll settle," Snape said, recovering his composure. "Your core needs time to stabilize at its full capacity. Days, possibly weeks." He turned to Neville. "Your turn, Longbottom." "Me?" Neville's voice cracked. "Potter suspected you'd been bound as well. I scanned you during class today when you weren't looking." Snape's expression was unreadable. He was right. Neville went pale. "What?" "Your binding is simpler, a single suppression ward tied to your magical signature. It's been in place since you were approximately 2 years old." "The signature." Snape paused, and for a moment, something that might have been compassion crossed his face. "The signature is Dumbledore's." Neville sat very still. Harry watched him and said nothing, because some things you had to process on your own. "My gran," Neville said finally. "She always said I was barely magical. She bought me my father's wand because she thought I'd need the help. And the whole time. The whole time, you were fighting through a binding that should have crippled you entirely," Snape finished. "The fact that you performed any magic at all is remarkable, Longbottom. You have a powerful core. Dumbledore simply didn't want you to access it." "Why?" Neville's voice was raw. "Why would he do that to me?" Harry answered, because he'd been thinking about this since Gringotts. "The prophecy, Neville. The one about Voldemort. It could have applied to 2 boys, one born at the end of July to parents who'd defied Voldemort 3 times. Me. And you." Neville looked at him. "You're saying—" "I'm saying Dumbledore chose me as his weapon and bound you to make sure you couldn't complicate things. He wanted 1 boy who lived, not 2. The silence that followed was the kind that reshapes relationships." Neville Longbottom sat on the floor of Severus Snape's office and understood, perhaps for the first time, that his life had been stolen just as surely as Harry's. Different shape, same thief. "Take it off," Neville said. His voice was steady now. Not angry, that would come later. Just certain. "Take it off me." Snape removed the binding in 20 minutes. Neville's release was quieter than Harry's, a warm golden glow that spread through the room like sunrise, gentle and steady and strong. When it was done, Neville sat up straighter than Harry had ever seen him, and the toad Trevor, who'd been sitting in Neville's pocket, croaked once and went still, as if he too could feel the change. "How do you feel?" Harry asked. Neville held up his hand. A tiny flower, a white lily, bloomed from his palm, growing from nothing, petals unfurling in the warm air of the dungeon office. He stared at it with wonder. Like myself, Neville said. For the first time, like myself. Snape stood and dusted off his robes. You'll both need to practice control. Your magical output will be significantly higher than you're accustomed to. I'd suggest starting with simple exercises and working up. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. Don't thank me. This is... Snape stopped. Started again. I owed your mother a debt I thought I could never repay. This is a start. He turned away before either boy could respond, busying himself with the cracked jars on his shelves. It was a dismissal as clear as any spoken word. Harry and Neville left the office and walked the dungeon corridors in companionable silence. The castle felt alive around them, warm and welcoming, and their magic, unbound, free, full, hummed in harmony with the ancient stones. They were halfway up the staircase to the ground floor when Harry felt it. A pulse. Not from the castle, not from his rings. From somewhere else, somewhere inside Hogwarts but hidden, warded, concealed behind layers of protection that Harry's newly expanded senses cut through like tissue paper. Something was alive down there. No, something was half alive, parasitic, feeding off another living thing. The Peverell ring went cold on his finger. Ice cold. The cracked stone flared with that dark, nameless light, and Harry felt the ring's awareness brush against whatever was hiding in the castle and recoil. Soul magic. Someone had hidden a piece of their soul in Hogwarts. Harry? Neville said, concerned. Do you know anything about the third-floor corridor? Harry asked. The one Dumbledore warned students about last year? Just that it's forbidden. Off-limits. Something about dying a painful death. Harry looked down at the Peverell ring. The stone, the resurrection stone, he knew now, though he hadn't fully processed what that meant, was pulsing steadily, pointing him toward the hidden thing like a compass needle finding north. Not Dumbledore's protections, Harry murmured. Something else. Something that was here before him. Not tonight. He was tired, his core was still stabilizing, and he had a Wizengamot hearing to prepare for. But soon. Very soon. Come on, Harry said, starting up the stairs again. We've got work to do. Neville followed, and the castle settled around them, old and watchful and waiting. In its deepest levels, past the dungeons, past the chamber that no one remembered, something stirred in response to the Peverell magic that was flowing through its halls for the first time in centuries. Something that had been waiting even longer than the castle. Chapter 3, The New Order. 3 days after Harry Potter stripped Albus Dumbledore of his magic, the Wizengamot convened an emergency session, and Harry walked into the chamber like he'd been doing it his whole life. The Wizengamot chamber was buried deep beneath the Ministry of Magic, a vast, circular room with tiered stone benches rising on all sides like an amphitheater, lit by floating braziers that cast shifting shadows across the faces of the most powerful witches and wizards in Britain. The ceiling was enchanted to show a night sky full of cold, distant stars, and the chief warlock's chair, empty now, conspicuously empty, sat on a raised dais at the center of the room like a throne waiting for a king who wasn't coming. Harry wore formal robes in black, cut to goblin standards, with the crests of all three houses embroidered on the breast, the Potter Griffin in gold, the Black Ravens in silver, the Peverell triangle and circle in a thread that seemed to shift between colors depending on the angle. The 3 rings gleamed on his fingers. He looked, one reporter would later write, like a very small general arriving to accept a very large surrender. Neville walked at his right side. They'd spent the previous evening in the Slytherin common room with Draco and Blaise going over Wizengamot protocols, who sat where, who allied with whom, which families could be swayed and which were locked into positions so rigid they might as well be carved from the same stone as their seats. Neville was there as the heir to House Longbottom, his grandmother Augusta having granted him provisional authority to observe and learn. He wore his own family crest and carried himself with the steady confidence of a boy whose magic had been unchained 72 hours ago and who was still discovering what that meant. Hermione wasn't permitted in the chamber, non-members couldn't attend closed sessions, but she'd spent the previous night preparing a 50-page legal brief that Ragnarok had called adequate, which from a goblin advocate was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. She was waiting outside with a stack of supplementary research and an expression that dared anyone to question her right to be there. The chamber was already full when Harry entered. Wizengamot members in plum-colored robes filled the tiered benches, their murmured conversations dying to silence as Harry descended the central staircase. He could feel their eyes, the weight of 100 gazes, some hostile, some curious, some frightened. At the ministry box, Cornelius Fudge sat in his lime-green bowler hat, flanked by advisors who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Amelia Bones occupied the DMLE section, ramrod straight, her files stacked in precise order. And in the visitors' gallery, restrained by 2 aurors and looking diminished in a way that went far beyond the physical, Albus Dumbledore sat in a simple wooden chair and watched Harry cross the chamber floor. He looked old. Not the performative aged wisdom that Dumbledore had worn like a costume for decades, actually old. Without magic to sustain him, his body had collapsed into its true age almost overnight. His skin was papery and thin, stretched tight over bones that seemed too prominent. His famous silver beard had gone dull and wispy. His hands, folded in his lap, trembled with a fine, constant tremor. But his eyes were sharp. Dulled of their magical twinkle, stripped of the legitimacy that had been his second sight for over a century, they were still the eyes of the most brilliant strategic mind in the wizarding world. And they tracked Harry with an intensity that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with intelligence. Harry met those eyes across the chamber. He didn't look away. Neither did Dumbledore. The emergency session of the Wizengamot will come to order, called Tiberius Ogden, the most senior member present, who had been pressed into service as temporary chair. He was ancient and liver-spotted and looked profoundly uncomfortable with the responsibility. We are convened to address multiple matters arising from the events of September 1st at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. First matter, the formal recognition of house claims. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, please approach. Harry walked to the center of the chamber. The braziers shifted, casting him in a pool of light that felt designed for exactly this kind of drama. The Wizengamot really was a theater at heart, all spectacle and posturing, wrapped in the language of law. Harry intended to use that. "I am Harry James Potter," he said, and his voice carried cleanly through the chamber without amplification. The acoustics were designed for it, but the Peverell ring helped. "Son of James Charles Potter and Lily Potter née Evans. I claim the lordship of the ancient and most noble house of Potter by blood right and magical inheritance." He raised his right hand. The Potter ring blazed gold. A surge of magic rippled through the chamber, not aggressive, not threatening, but undeniable. The ring was announcing itself to the institutional magic of the Wizengamot, and the Wizengamot's wards responded with recognition. "Claim verified," Ogden said, slightly breathless. "I claim the lordship of the ancient and most noble house of Black by blood right through my grandmother Doria Black Potter, and by magical inheritance as confirmed by the Black family ring in Gringotts Bank." The black ring flared silver. The same ripple, the same recognition. "Claim verified. And I claim the lordship of the most ancient and ancestral house of Peverell by blood right through the unbroken male line of the Potter family, descended from Ignotus Peverell, and by magical inheritance as confirmed by the Peverell ring and the acceptance of the Hogwarts ward stone." The Peverell ring pulsed with that deep, dark light. This time the ripple was different, heavier, older, carrying a resonance that made the stones of the chamber vibrate. Several Wizengamot members gripped their armrests. Fudge went white under his bowler hat. The Wizengamot's institutional magic didn't just recognize the Peverell claim, it deferred to it, the way a tributary defers to a river. "Claim." Ogden swallowed. "Claim verified. Lord Potter-Black-Peverell, you hold 3 seats on the Wizengamot. Please take your place." 3 seats. Harry had known, intellectually, what that meant. But walking up the tiered benches and settling into the Potter seat, ancient oak, carved with griffin motifs, still warm with the residual magic of every Lord Potter who'd sat there before him, made it visceral. To his left, the black seat, dark wood and silver inlay. To his right, the Peverell seat, which was made of stone so old it predated the chamber itself. 3 seats. 3 votes. In a body where most families held one, and alliances were built on margins of 2 or 3. Harry had just become one of the most powerful voting blocs in the Wisingamot without saying a word about policy. The chamber buzzed. Harry could feel allegiances shifting in real time, the soft calculations of 100 political minds adjusting to a new reality. Lucius Malfoy, seated in the Malfoy section with his silver blonde hair and his walking cane and his carefully neutral expression, was already reassessing. Harry could almost hear the gears turning behind those grey eyes. Second matter, Ogden called, trying to regain control. The investigation into Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Madam Bones, if you would present the DMLE's findings. Bones rose and delivered her report with the crisp professionalism of someone who had spent her entire career building toward moments exactly like this. The evidence was comprehensive. The Goblin notarized documents were entered into the record. The sealed will of James and Lily Potter was presented, and when its contents were read aloud, including the explicit, repeated instruction that Harry was never to be placed with Petunia Dursley, several members of the Wisingamot looked physically ill. The financial records came next. 3 million galleons, withdrawn over a decade from the Potter family vault, disbursed without the knowledge or consent of the Potter heir. Bones presented the transaction logs, the authorization signatures, all in Dumbledore's hand, and the accounts they'd been funneled into. Then the core binding. Madame Pomfrey had been deposed, and her testimony was read into the record. She'd examined Harry at Bones's request and confirmed the residual signatures of a 3-layered suppression ward consistent with the magical signature of Albus Dumbledore's wand. The binding had been in place for approximately 10 years and had caused measurable damage to Harry's magical development, damage that was now healing but would take months to fully reverse. And finally, Sirius Black. We have reviewed the DMLE records from November 1981, Bones said, and her voice carried a controlled fury that was more devastating than any shout. There is no record of a trial for Sirius Orion Black. No arraignment. No hearing. No deposition. No evidence was presented, no witnesses were called, and no defense was mounted. Sirius Black was arrested by Aurors on the street, processed into Azkaban within 6 hours, and has remained there without legal proceedings for 10 years. The chamber erupted. Not whispers, shouting. Outrage from some quarters, desperate deflection from others. Fudge was conferring frantically with his advisors. Lucius Malfoy's careful neutrality had cracked into something that looked like genuine shock, which was interesting. Even the Death Eaters hadn't known Black was imprisoned without a trial. The Wisingamot Charter, Bones continued, raising her voice over the noise, guarantees the right of trial to every witch and wizard accused of a crime. This right is absolute and non-negotiable. The failure to provide this right to Sirius Black represents the most serious breach of Wisingamot law in modern history, and the responsibility falls on the offices that had the authority and the obligation to ensure it was upheld. She paused. Specifically, the office of the Chief Warlock. Every eye turned to Dumbledore. The old man sat in his wooden chair, trembling hands folded, and said nothing. His expression was calm, resigned, almost. As if he'd known this was coming and had already made his peace with it. But Harry saw his jaw tighten when Black's name was spoken, saw the flicker of something in those dull blue eyes that might have been guilt. Albus Dumbledore, Ogden said. You are charged with theft of House Potter assets, illegal seizure and misplacement of a noble heir, magical assault against a minor, and criminal negligence in the denial of trial to Sirius Black. How do you respond? Dumbledore stood. Even without magic, even diminished and frail, he commanded attention. It was the posture, the voice, the century of practice at being the most important person in any room. I will not deny the facts as presented, Dumbledore said, and his voice was thinner now but still carried. I sealed the will. I placed Harry with the Dursleys. I authorized the vault withdrawals. I bound his magical core. And I failed to ensure Sirius Black received a trial. Silence. Absolute silence. Even Harry hadn't expected a full confession. I did these things, Dumbledore continued, because I believed they were necessary for the survival of the wizarding world. The prophecy concerning Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, the chamber flinched at the name. Dumbledore pressed on. Required that Harry be protected, prepared, and positioned to fulfill his role. The blood wards at the Dursleys' home provided unparalleled protection against Voldemort's followers. The core binding ensured that Harry's magic would not attract attention from remnant Death Eaters before he was old enough to defend himself. The vault withdrawals funded the Order of the Phoenix, which maintained vigilance against the dark forces that never truly dispersed. And Sirius Black, Dumbledore paused. Sirius Black was, I believed at the time, the Potter's secret keeper and the man who betrayed them to Voldemort. Believed, Harry said. Every head swiveled to him. Harry stood from the Potter seat. You believed, Headmaster. Or you assumed. Because the evidence suggests that Sirius Black was not the secret keeper. The Potters switched to Peter Pettigrew at the last moment, a fact you could have discovered with a single interrogation under Veritaserum, which you chose not to pursue. The circumstances at the time were chaotic, the circumstances at the time were convenient. Sirius Black was my godfather and my legal guardian. With him in Azkaban, you had uncontested control over my placement and my assets. Pettigrew was the traitor, and you either knew it and didn't act, or you didn't bother to check. Neither option reflects well on you. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the chamber, and something shifted in his expression. Not anger, something sadder. Wearier. You're right, he said quietly. I should have investigated. I should have demanded a trial. I should have done many things differently. But I was fighting a war, Harry, and in war, the war ended 10 years ago. You've had a decade to correct your mistakes. Instead, you compounded them. Harry's voice was steady. Every year Sirius spent in Azkaban was a choice you made. Every year I spent in that cupboard was a choice you made. You don't get to wrap those choices in noble intentions and call them sacrifice. Sacrifice is what my parents did. What you did was control. The chamber was so quiet Harry could hear the braziers flickering. Madam Bones, Harry said, not taking his eyes off Dumbledore. I move for the immediate release and trial of Sirius Black. As Lord Black, I invoke the Wisengamot Charter's guarantee of trial by peers. I further move that Peter Pettigrew be declared a person of interest and that a warrant be issued for his arrest. Pettigrew is dead, Fudge sputtered, unable to contain himself any longer. He was killed by Black. There were witnesses who saw an explosion and found a finger. No body was recovered. No death was confirmed by magical means. And the witnesses were muggles whose memories were modified by the Ministry within hours. Harry turned to Fudge with an expression that was polite and utterly merciless. Minister, with respect, the fact that your predecessor's administration declared a man dead based on a finger should concern you. Bodies can be faked. Fingers can be severed. But a trial under Veritaserum doesn't lie. Fudge opened his mouth, closed it, and looked desperately at Lucius Malfoy, who offered no help whatsoever. Lucius was watching Harry with the expression of a man who was rapidly recalculating whether his alliance with Fudge was still worth the investment. The motion is noted, Ogden said. We will vote. All in favor of the immediate release and trial of Sirius Orion Black. Harry raised 3 votes. The Longbottom proxy, Augusta, fierce and iron-spined, who had cornered Harry before the session and told him that if he could save the boy who'd been her son's best friend, she'd back him to the gates of hell, raised 1. The Bones seat raised 1. The Abbott seat, the Macmillan seat, the Greengrass seat. One by one, hands went up. Some reluctantly. Some defiantly. Some with the careful calculation of families who recognized which way the wind was blowing and wanted to be on the right side of history. When the votes were counted, it was 47 in favor, 21 against, with 12 abstentions. Motion carries, Ogden announced. Sirius Black will be transferred from Azkaban to Ministry holding cells for trial within 48 hours. Harry sat down. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the effort of holding himself together. Sirius. His godfather. The man his parents had trusted above all others. Coming home. He clenched his fists until the shaking stopped and focused on what came next. Final matter, Ogden said, visibly exhausted by a session that had already blown past every norm the Wizengamot usually observed. The disposition of Albus Dumbledore. This was where it got complicated. Dumbledore had confessed, which simplified the legal question but complicated the political one. Half the Wizengamot wanted him imprisoned. The other half wanted the whole thing to quietly disappear. Fudge wanted whatever outcome would make the problem go away fastest. And Dumbledore himself sat in his wooden chair and waited, watching the proceedings with the detached interest of a chess master observing a game he was no longer playing. Harry stood again. I have a proposal. The chamber focused. Albus Dumbledore has been stripped of his magic. He is, functionally, a squib. He will never cast another spell, hold another magical office, or wield magical influence again. His crimes are real, and they should be recorded and acknowledged. But imprisonment serves no one. The man in that chair is 110 years old without magic. He's not a threat. Murmurs. Surprised murmurs. Harry could feel the confusion. They'd expected him to push for blood. To demand maximum punishment. The fact that he wasn't through every calculation in the room off balance. What I want, Harry continued, is restitution. Full repayment of all stolen assets to the Potter Vault, with interest, from Dumbledore's personal holdings. A public acknowledgement of guilt, entered into the permanent record. Lifetime ban from any position of authority over children. And a magical oath, administered by goblin witnesses, that Dumbledore will never again attempt to manipulate, control, or interfere with the lives of Harry Potter, Neville Longbottom, or any member of Houses Potter, Black, or Peverell. And if I refuse the oath? Dumbledore asked, his voice carrying across the chamber. Then you go to Azkaban. But I don't think you will. Harry met the old man's eyes. You've lost your magic, headmaster. You've lost your positions. You've lost the trust of every person who believed in you. The only thing you have left is your mind, and a cell in Azkaban will take that too. I'm offering you a chance to spend whatever years you have left making amends instead of rotting. Dumbledore studied him for a long, long time. The chamber held its breath. You are remarkably like your mother, Dumbledore said finally. She also had the gift of being merciful without being weak. He straightened in his chair. I accept your terms. The oath was administered on the spot, with Ragnarok presiding and the full Wizengamot as witness. Dumbledore spoke the words in a voice that cracked twice and held steady through the rest, and when the oath settled into his bones, visible even without magic, a shimmer of binding gold that the goblins wove from their own craft, something in the old man's posture changed. Not defeat. Release. Harry watched him and felt nothing triumphant. Just tired. And the faintest stirring of something he refused to call pity. The session adjourned. Members filed out in clusters, whispering furiously, the political landscape of magical Britain reshaping itself in real time around the exit of a legend and the arrival of something entirely new. They brought Sirius home on a Thursday. Harry wasn't allowed at Azkaban for the transfer, too dangerous, Bones said, and for once Harry didn't argue because the Peverell ring went cold and hostile every time he thought about the prison, as if it could feel the Dementors from hundreds of miles away and wanted nothing to do with them. Instead, he waited in a private room at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, sitting in a hard chair with his hands clasped between his knees and his heart doing something complicated in his chest. Neville was there. Hermione was there. They'd become a unit over the past week, 3 first years who moved through Hogwarts like a small, determined army, attending classes and dismantling decades of corruption in equal measure. Draco and Blaise had stayed at school, this was personal, and they understood the difference. The door opened at 11 in the morning. Sirius Black was a skeleton wrapped in skin. 12 years in Azkaban, Harry had done the real math, it was closer to 12 than 10, and every year showed, had stripped him of everything except the framework. He was gaunt and hollow-eyed and his hair hung in matted curtains around a face that had been handsome once and was now a roadmap of suffering. He wore clean robes that hung off him like sails, and he moved with the careful, shuffling gait of a man who'd forgotten that he was allowed to walk in a straight line. 2 healers flanked him. Behind them, Amelia Bones stood with her arms crossed and her expression carefully neutral. Sirius stopped in the doorway. His eyes, grey, sunken, haunted, swept the room and found Harry. Harry stood up. For a moment, neither of them moved. Sirius stared at Harry with an expression of such naked disbelief that it hurt to look at directly, like staring into a wound. His mouth opened. No sound came out. He tried again. "You look like James," Sirius whispered. "Except the eyes. Those are lilies." "I know." Sirius made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "She'd have hexed me for letting you grow up with Petunia. She'd have burned the world down. She didn't have to. I handled it." Sirius crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Harry into a hug that was all bones and desperation and 12 years of grief pouring out through the arms of a man who thought he'd die without ever holding his godson. Harry hugged him back. He was small against Sirius's wasted frame, but the rings hummed warm on his fingers and his magic, his full, unbound magic, wrapped around them both like a shield. "I'm sorry," Sirius said into Harry's hair. I'm sorry, I should have been there, you're here now. That's what matters." They stood like that for a long time. Neville turned away and wiped his eyes. Hermione was already crying openly, her legal briefs forgotten on her lap. Even Bones looked away, finding something fascinating about the ceiling tiles. When Sirius finally pulled back, holding Harry at arm's length to look at him properly, his eyes dropped to the rings. "That's the black ring," he said. "And is that the Peverell ring?" "Long story." Sirius barked a laugh that sounded rusty from disuse. "I've got time. Apparently I'm a free man." "Not quite yet. The trial is tomorrow. But the Wisengamot already voted for your release, and Bones has Pettigrew on a wanted list. It's a formality." "Pettigrew." Sirius's expression hardened, the broken man retreating behind something older and fiercer. "He's alive. I knew it. I've known it for 12 years, screaming it at the walls of that cell. He's alive, and we'll find him." Harry guided Sirius to a chair. "But first, you need food and rest and a healer, in that order. And I need to tell you everything that's happened." Harry told him. All of it. The Dursleys, the goblins, the rings, the sorting, Dumbledore's fall. Sirius listened with growing intensity, his grey eyes sharpening as the story progressed, the fog of Azkaban burning away under the heat of righteous fury. When Harry described the rite of stripping, the dark light of the Peverell ring flowing across the great hall floor, passing through Dumbledore's shields like they were smoke, Sirius's face split into a grin that was savage and joyful and exactly the kind of expression that must have once made him the terror of Hogwarts. "You magnificent little monster," Sirius said. James would be rolling in his grave laughing. Lily would be taking notes. "There's more," Harry said. He told Sirius about the wards, the compulsions, the core bindings, his and Neville's. About Snape's unexpected alliance. About the thing he'd felt in the castle's depths, the soul magic, the wrongness that the Peverell ring had recoiled from. Sirius stopped smiling. "Soul magic. You're sure?" "The ring is sure. It reacted like it was touching something diseased." Whatever's down there, it's connected to something, or someone, who's split their soul. Voldemort. Sirius said the name without flinching, one of the few wizards who'd never adopted the euphemisms. He was obsessed with immortality. Everyone knew that. If he found a way to anchor his soul, then killing him once wasn't enough. And he's not really gone. They sat with that for a moment. Then Sirius leaned forward and gripped Harry's shoulder. You're not facing this alone. Whatever comes next, Voldemort, the Ministry, the whole bloody wizarding world, you've got me. You've always had me, even when I couldn't be here. I know. Harry put his hand over Sirius's. Welcome home. The trial was swift and brutal. Under Veritaserum, Sirius Black testified that he had never been the Potter's secret keeper, had never served Voldemort, and had pursued Peter Pettigrew to the Muggle Street where the explosion occurred, an explosion caused by Pettigrew himself, who had cut off his own finger, blasted the street apart, transformed into his animagus form, a rat, which drew gasps from the chamber, and escaped into the sewers. The Wizengamot acquitted Sirius in 40 minutes. He walked out of the chamber a free man, blinking in the atrium's magical sunlight, and promptly filed formal paperwork to assume his role as Harry's guardian. The political reverberations were enormous. Within a week, Fudge was facing a no-confidence motion. Lucius Malfoy, with the survival instincts of a man who talked his way out of a Death Eater conviction, distanced himself from Fudge's administration and began making careful overtures toward Harry's growing coalition. Augusta Longbottom organized a block of traditional families who'd been marginalized by Dumbledore's influence and began pushing for systemic reform. Harry watched it all from Hogwarts, where he was still, technically, a first-year student with homework. The school had changed. With the compulsions stripped from the wards, the house dynamics shifted almost overnight. Slytherin students, freed from the subtle paranoia and aggression that had been pressed into them for decades, began cautiously engaging with other houses. It wasn't dramatic, there were no grand gestures of reconciliation, no tearful cross-house friendships blooming in the corridors. It was smaller than that. A Slytherin and a Hufflepuff sharing a library table without tension. A Ravenclaw sitting with a Slytherin at lunch because they were both interested in arithmancy. The tiny, human interactions that Dumbledore's wards had suppressed for 40 years, reasserting themselves like flowers pushing through concrete. Not everyone adjusted easily. Some students, Slytherin and otherwise, had been marinating in the compulsions for years and had built their identities around the behaviors those compulsions encouraged. Marcus Flint, the Slytherin Quidditch captain, got into 3 fights in a week before the anger drained out of him and he was seen sitting alone by the lake, looking bewildered and lost, like a man who'd just woken from a long and violent dream. McGonagall handled it. She was extraordinary, now that she was fully in command, decisive, compassionate, tireless. She brought in a mind healer from St. Mungo's to work with students experiencing compulsion aftereffects. She restructured the point system to reward inter-house cooperation. She gave Snape, of all people, the latitude to reform Slytherin House from within, and Snape, still sharp, still difficult, but functioning now as a head of house who actually cared about his students' well-being, rose to it with a ferocity that surprised everyone except Harry. Classes were going well. Harry's unbound core made everything easier, charms came naturally, transfiguration was almost instinctive, and the Potter Rings memory archive gave him access to centuries of magical knowledge that he could translate into practice with startling speed. He wasn't just top of his year, he was operating at a level that made his professors blink. Flitwick, after watching Harry perform a perfect levitation charm on his first attempt and then modify it mid-cast to levitate 6 objects simultaneously, had to sit down and have a glass of water. But Harry didn't coast. He worked, because the power meant nothing without control, and control meant practice. Every evening, he could be found in an empty classroom, the room of requirement, which Hogwarts had revealed to him within days of his arrival, practically shoving the door into his path, training with the ring memories, cycling through dueling techniques and ward crafting and magical theory with a discipline that Griphook would have approved of. Neville trained with him. The Longbottom heir's unbound magic had manifested in a spectacular affinity for herbology and nature magic. Plants responded to him like eager puppies, growing and blooming and twisting at his command. But Neville wanted more. He wanted combat magic, defensive skills, the ability to stand beside Harry when things got bad. And things, they both knew, were going to get bad. Because the thing in the third-floor corridor hadn't gone away. Harry had investigated carefully over the past week, using the castle's own senses, fed through the Peverell ring, to map what Dumbledore had hidden behind the locked door on the forbidden corridor. The traps were elaborate: a three-headed dog, Hagrid's, apparently, named Fluffy, a devil's snare, enchanted keys, a giant chess set, a logic puzzle, and at the heart of it all, a small room containing a mirror and a single object wrapped in powerful protective enchantments. The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel's masterwork. The source of the elixir of life. Dumbledore had brought it to Hogwarts for safekeeping. Harry suspected the real reason was bait, a trap for Voldemort or his agents, using a school full of children as the backdrop. Classic Dumbledore, the greater good justified any risk, as long as the risk was someone else's. But the soul magic Harry had detected wasn't coming from the stone. It was coming from something else entirely, something mobile, something that moved through the castle at night with a wrongness that made the Peverell ring pulse in warning. Harry had narrowed it down over several nights of careful observation. It was coming from Professor Quirrell. The defense against the dark arts teacher was a stuttering, turban-wearing nervous wreck on the surface. Beneath the surface, beneath the turban, something else lived. Something that stank of dark magic and fractured soul and old, patient malice. The Peverell ring, with its deep connection to death magic, could sense it like a bloodhound sensing a trail. Voldemort. Parasitically attached to the back of Quirrell's head, feeding off his life force, biding his time. Waiting to steal the Philosopher's Stone and use the elixir to rebuild a body. Harry told Snape first. The potion's master went white, then grey, then a shade that suggested he was seriously considering being sick. The dark mark on his arm, faded but present, burned when Harry described what the ring was sensing, and Snape gripped his forearm with a hiss that confirmed everything. "He's here," Snape said. "In the castle. With the students. He's been here since September." Dumbledore either knew and was using him as part of whatever trap he'd set, or he missed it entirely. Dumbledore knew. Snape's voice was flat. He always knew. The stone was bait. Quirrell was the anticipated vector. Dumbledore was playing a game with the Dark Lord using a school full of children as the board. He looked at Harry. "What do you want to do?" "End it. You're 11. I'm Lord Peverell with an unbound core and the power of 3 houses backing me. And the Peverell ring does something to soul magic, I can feel it. It wants to touch Voldemort's fragment. It wants to consume it." Snape stared at him. "The Resurrection Stone. Ignotus Peverell's Hallow. It interacts with death magic. Voldemort's soul anchors are the ultimate violation of death. The ring sees them as an abomination. If you confront Quirrell, if you confront the Dark Lord, I'm not going to do it alone. And I'm not going to do it in secret." Harry's jaw set. Dumbledore's mistake was always operating in the shadows. Secrets are where evil grows. I want witnesses. I want the whole castle to see what's been hiding in their midst. He chose Saturday evening. Maximum students in the castle. Maximum witnesses. Harry gathered his people in the room of requirement at 5 o'clock. Neville, steady and strong, his magic humming with barely contained potential. Hermione, who'd researched Horcruxes, because of course she had, once Harry told her what the ring was detecting, she'd gone to the restricted section under McGonagall's authority and come back with information that made her look like she hadn't slept for 2 days. Draco, who'd been told the bare minimum and had accepted it with the cold pragmatism of a boy who'd grown up hearing Voldemort's name spoken with fear in his own home. Blaise, armed with a sardonic detachment that masked genuine loyalty. And Snape, who'd arrived in full combat robes with extra potions strapped to his belt and the expression of a man settling a very old debt. "Quirrell will be in the Great Hall for dinner," Harry said. "So will 300 students and every professor. I'm going to confront him there." "You're going to reveal the Dark Lord's presence in a room full of children," Snape said flatly. "I'm going to remove the Dark Lord's presence from a room full of children. There's a difference. And if the Dark Lord fights? He's a parasite on the back of a mediocre wizard's head. Quirrell's body is failing, I can see it. He's weaker every day. Voldemort is sustaining him, but barely. If I force a confrontation now, before he gets the stone, before he has a body, I face him at his weakest." "Weakest is still dangerous," Snape said. "Everything worth doing is dangerous. But I've got something Voldemort doesn't expect, 3 halo-connected rings and a castle that answers to my blood. He's hiding in my house, Professor. I'm throwing him out." Snape looked at him for a long, waited moment. Then he nodded once. "I'll have anti-possession wards ready. If Voldemort attempts to flee Quirrell's body, I can contain him temporarily." "Hermione?" "I've prepared a modified containment circle based on 13th century soul-binding techniques," Hermione said, pulling a roll of parchment from her bag that was covered in runes so complex they seemed to move. "If we can get the Wraith form into the circle, it should hold him long enough for the Peverell ring to do, whatever it's going to do." "Neville? I'm watching your back. Simple. Solid. Absolute. Draco, Blaise, I need you at the Slytherin table. If things go bad, get the younger students out. Every first and second year, out the door, down to the dungeons. Can you do that?" Draco straightened. "We'll handle it." "Good." Harry looked at each of them. These people, these children and this one complicated, damaged man, were his. Not because of oaths or alliances or political calculation, but because they'd chosen to stand here. Because they trusted him. He would not let them down. "Let's go to dinner." The Great Hall was warm and loud and full of the Saturday evening energy that came from students with no homework deadlines until Monday. The enchanted ceiling showed a clear night sky, stars sharp as pins, and the 4 house tables were crowded with students eating and laughing and being, in every way that mattered, ordinary children in an extraordinary place. Harry entered with Neville at his side and took his seat at the Slytherin table. Draco and Blaise were already there, positioned near the younger students as instructed. Hermione was at the Gryffindor table, the containment circle hidden in her bag, her wand within easy reach. At the staff table, Quirrell was eating soup. His turban was wrapped tight, his hands trembled with their perpetual nervous shake, and his eyes darted around the room with the hunted look of a man whose passenger was whispering in his ear. Snape sat 3 seats from Quirrell, not looking at him. His hand rested on his thigh, near his wand. Beneath the table, Harry knew, he'd already cast the anti-possession ward. Harry ate roast chicken, potatoes, treacle tart. He made himself eat slowly, normally, because the adrenaline was already building and he needed the fuel. The Peverell ring was pulsing steadily, its awareness focused on Quirrell with the fixed intensity of a predator tracking prey. Harry could feel the soul fragment more clearly now than ever, a rotten, screaming wrongness that polluted Quirrell's magical signature like oil in clean water. Dessert came and went. Students began drifting toward the doors, heading for common rooms and weekend plans. This was the moment, enough students to serve as witnesses, few enough that the exits were clear. Harry stood up from the Slytherin table and walked toward the staff table. The movement drew attention immediately. Students paused in their conversations. Professors looked up from their plates. Quirrell, sensing the shift in the room's energy, went rigid. "Professor Quirrell," Harry said, and his voice carried through the hall the way it had on sorting night, the castle amplifying it, recognizing his intent. "Take off your turban." The hall went silent. Quirrell's stutter evaporated. His nervous, twitching exterior dropped away like a discarded coat, and what was left underneath was cold and calculating and not entirely human. His eyes, which had been watery and fearful, sharpened into something predatory. "I don't think I will," Quirrell said, and his voice was steady for the first time anyone could remember. It wasn't a request. Harry raised his left hand. The Peverell ring blazed. "I am Lord Peverell, and I command the wards of this castle. You are harboring a parasitic entity within Hogwarts in violation of the castle's founding protections. I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully." Quirrell laughed. It was an ugly sound, nothing like the stuttering, self-deprecating chuckle he'd used for months. "Peacefully. The boy offers me peace." He tilted his head, as if listening to something no one else could hear. "My master has a different offer." The turban began to unravel. It happened slowly at first, the purple cloth loosening, falling away in coils, and then all at once. The back of Quirrell's head was exposed to the Great Hall, and 300 students saw what had been hiding among them for months. A face. Chalk-white, snake-featured, with slitted red eyes that burned like embers in the shadowed flesh. Voldemort's face, fused to the back of Quirrell's skull, parasitic and obscene and radiating malice so intense that the nearest students scrambled backward, knocking over benches and goblets. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, and his voice was a whisper that somehow filled the room. "We meet again." "We do." Harry didn't step back. The rings blazed on his fingers, all three, Potter gold and black silver and Peverell dark. His unbound magic surged around him, visible in the air as a shimmer of green light. "You look terrible." Something that might have been surprise flickered across Voldemort's distorted features. He wasn't used to being mocked. He wasn't used to 11-year-olds who didn't tremble. "Kill him," Voldemort hissed, and Quirrell spun, wand rising, dark magic already gathering at the tip. Harry moved. Not defensively. Not cautiously. He moved like the Potter ring had taught him, like Charles Potter, who dueled Grindelwald's lieutenants and won, like his father James, who'd faced Voldemort 3 times and survived. His wand was in his hand before Quirrell finished turning, and the spell that left its tip wasn't a first-year charm. It was a concussive blast of raw magical force that hit Quirrell in the chest and launched him backward into the staff table. Plates shattered. Professors dove aside. McGonagall's wand was out instantly, a shield springing up between the fight and the student tables. Snape was on his feet, his own wand tracing the containment patterns he'd prepared. Quirrell hit the wall behind the staff table and crumpled, then rose, Voldemort's magic flooding through his failing body, dark energy crackling around him like a corona. His skin was gray and splitting now, the parasitic connection destroying his body in real time as Voldemort pushed more power through a vessel that couldn't sustain it. "Foolish boy," Voldemort snarled. "You think your parlor tricks." Harry didn't let him finish. He pressed forward, wand blazing, and the duel began in earnest. It was nothing like what the students had been taught to expect. There were no formal bows, no counted paces, no polite exchanges of colored light. This was combat magic, fast, brutal, and terrifyingly creative. Quirrell Voldemort launched killing curses, torture curses, dark magic so vile it left black scorch marks on the ancient stone. Harry countered with shields that burned gold and silver, deflected with ward constructs drawn from the Potter archive, and attacked with a ferocity that had the entire Great Hall pressed against the walls. The Elder Wand's absence made a difference. Without the Death Stick, Voldemort was channeling his diminished power through Quirrell's wand, an adequate tool for an ordinary wizard, but utterly insufficient for the kind of magic the Dark Lord was trying to wield. His spells were powerful but imprecise, burning through Quirrell's body with every cast. Harry could see it, the host failing, the magic eating him alive. Harry didn't need to win the duel. He just needed to survive it long enough for Quirrell to fall apart. But the Peverell ring had other ideas. The cracked stone flared with sudden, violent intensity, and Harry felt the ring's awareness latch onto the soul fragment in Quirrell with a hunger that was almost sentient. The resurrection stone recognized what Voldemort had done, the violation of death's domain, the tearing of a soul, the obscene refusal of mortality, and it responded with an authority older than the wizarding world. Dark light erupted from Harry's left hand. Not the controlled flow he'd used against Dumbledore, this was a torrent, a river of ancient power that surged across the gap between them and struck Quirrell Voldemort like a tidal wave. Voldemort screamed. The sound was inhuman, a high, shrieking wail of agony that shattered every glass in the great hall and sent the enchanted candles spinning wildly. The dark light wrapped around Quirrell's body and squeezed, and Harry could feel the Peverell ring working, reaching through the physical shell, finding the soul fragment, and pulling. It was like extracting a barbed hook from flesh. The soul fragment fought, thrashed and screamed and clawed at its host with desperate, animal ferocity. Quirrell collapsed, convulsing on the stone floor, and the face on the back of his head was howling, red eyes blazing, mouth stretched in a rictus of rage and fear. Now! Harry shouted. Hermione was already moving. She'd sprinted from the Gryffindor table the moment the turban came off, drawing the containment circle on the floor with a self-inking quill enchanted to leave runic lines, working with a speed and precision that would have impressed a professional wardcrafter. The circle blazed to life around Quirrell's thrashing body, silver-white runes burning in the stone, forming a cage of ancient symbols designed to hold exactly what was trying to escape. Snape's anti-possession ward snapped into place over the circle like a lid on a jar. The Peverell ring pulled the soul fragment free. It came out screaming, a black, writhing mass of spectral energy that looked like smoke and moved like something alive. Voldemort's wraith form, torn from its host, slammed against the containment circle and howled. The runes held. Hermione's work held. The wraith battered itself against the walls of its prison, and the circle flared brighter with each impact. Quirrell lay still on the floor. Breathing, barely. The possession had nearly killed him, and the extraction had finished the job. He was alive, but only just, his body a broken shell that no longer housed anything but his own battered soul. Madame Pomfrey. McGonagall called, already directing the school nurse toward Quirrell. The students were pressed against the walls, some crying, some staring in horrified fascination, some, the older Slytherins, the Gryffindor Quidditch team, a cluster of Ravenclaws who produced notebooks, watching with the intensity of people who knew they were witnessing history. Harry stood over the containment circle and looked down at the wraith. It was diminished, a fragment of a fragment, barely sentient, running on rage and survival instinct. But those red eyes still burned, and the malice that radiated from it was a physical force. Harry Potter. The wraith hissed. You cannot destroy me. I am immortal. I have ensured Horcruxes, Harry said calmly. I know. You tore your soul apart and hid the pieces. The diary. The ring. The locket. The cup. The diadem. He watched the wraith's eyes widen with each word. The Peverell ring can feel them all. Every single anchor you've placed in this world, I can sense them through the stone. You're not immortal, Tom. You're scattered. The use of the name, his real name, the Muggle name he'd spent decades trying to erase, made the wraith recoil as if struck. And I'm going to find every single piece, Harry continued, and I'm going to destroy them. One by one. Until there's nothing left of you but a bad memory. The wraith screamed, one final, defiant shriek of rage, and hurled itself against the containment circle with everything it had. The runes flared, Hermione's circle strained, Snape's ward cracked, Harry pressed the Peverell ring against the circle's edge. The dark light poured into the containment zone. It wrapped around the wraith like a closing fist, and the resurrection stone did what it was made to do, not resurrect, not this time, but the opposite. It enforced the natural order. It reminded the fragment of Tom Riddle's soul that it was supposed to be dead, that its existence was a violation, that death was not an enemy to be defeated but a door that had been waiting open for 50 years. The wraith dissolved. Not with a bang, with a whisper. A sigh. A fading. The black smoke thinned and paled and became nothing, and the red eyes winked out like blown candles, and then the containment circle was empty and the great hall was quiet and Voldemort's fragment was gone. Not dead. Harry could feel the difference through the ring. The other anchors still existed, 5 points of wrongness scattered across Britain, pulsing faintly in his awareness like distant, diseased stars. Voldemort's soul was diminished but not destroyed. Not yet. Harry lowered his hand. The Peverell ring cooled. The great hall was utterly silent. Then Neville Longbottom started clapping. It was a strange sound in the devastated hall, one pair of hands, slow and steady, echoing off the ancient stones. Then Hermione joined in. Then a Hufflepuff fourth year. Then a Ravenclaw. Then the Weasley twins, who stood on their bench and hooped. The applause spread through the great hall like a wave, building from tentative to thunderous, and Harry stood in the middle of it and let it wash over him and thought, this is what Dumbledore never understood. You don't protect people by keeping them in the dark. You protect them by standing in front of them in the light. Snape was crouched over Quirrell, running diagnostic spells. He'll live, the potions master said without looking up. Barely. The possession caused extensive neural and magical damage. He'll need months of treatment. Get him to the hospital wing, McGonagall said. She was standing beside Harry, and her hand came to rest on his shoulder, brief, firm, gone almost before he felt it. Mr. Potter. Harry. Are you all right? I'm fine, Professor. You just fought the Dark Lord in the middle of my great hall. Sorry about the glasses. McGonagall made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. You impossible boy. 10 points to Slytherin. Only 10. Don't push it. The aftermath of the Great Hall confrontation was, if anything, even more seismic than the Dumbledore incident. The wizarding world had spent a decade pretending Voldemort was dead and gone. Harry had just dragged that lie into the light, in front of 300 witnesses, and shattered it with prejudice. The Ministry couldn't suppress it. The Prophet couldn't spin it. 300 students sent owls home that night, and by morning, every magical household in Britain knew that Voldemort had been possessing a Hogwarts professor, that the boy who lived had ripped him out and destroyed a piece of his soul, and that the safest place in wizarding Britain had been compromised under Dumbledore's watch. Fudge's no-confidence motion passed 3 days later. He was replaced as interim minister by Amelia Bones, which was both the obvious choice and the best possible outcome. Bones was competent, honest, and increasingly allied with Harry's coalition, not because she was his puppet, but because their goals aligned: justice, accountability, reform. Sirius was released from St. Mungo's in the second week of October. He was still thin, still haunted, still prone to going quiet at unexpected moments when the Dementor memories surfaced. But he was free and he was present, and he moved into a suite of rooms at Hogwarts, McGonagall's invitation, partly as Harry's guardian and partly as an informal defense consultant, since the position was now conspicuously vacant. Harry trained. Every day, without fail. The Horcruxes were out there: the diary, the ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, and the Peverell ring could sense them all, faint pulses of wrongness scattered across the map of Britain. Finding them would take time, resources, and allies. Harry had all three. And he had something else, something he hadn't expected. A life. It crept up on him. Between the politics and the training and the world-shaking revelations, Harry found himself doing ordinary things. Playing chess with Draco in the common room. Studying with Hermione in the library, her quill scratching furiously while he worked through transfiguration theory. Walking the grounds with Neville, who discovered that the Hogwarts greenhouses responded to his unbound magic with ecstatic enthusiasm, producing blooms and fruits that hadn't been seen in centuries. Listening to Blaze's dry commentary on pure-blood social dynamics, which was funnier and more insightful than any textbook. Sitting in Snape's office after hours, discussing potions theory while the professor pretended he wasn't enjoying the conversation. Eating breakfast while Sirius told stories about James and Lily that made Harry laugh until his ribs ached. Ordinary things. Human things. The things Dumbledore had stolen from him for 10 years. One evening in late October, Harry sat in the Slytherin common room after dinner, watching the lake through the windows. The giant squid drifted past, tentacles trailing lazily. The fire crackled. Draco was writing a letter to his mother, the tone of which, Harry knew, had changed dramatically since Narcissa learned that her house lord was an 11-year-old who'd brought Dumbledore to his knees. Blaise was reading. Theo Knott was playing Exploding Snap with a quiet focus that belied his usual detachment. Hermione appeared at the common room entrance. She'd been given the password weeks ago, which had caused a minor scandal that nobody cared about anymore, and dropped into the chair beside Harry with her bag full of restricted section books and a piece of parchment covered in what looked like a map. "I've been cross-referencing the Peverell Ring's directional sense with historical records of Voldemort's known locations," she said without preamble. "The diary is most likely with a follower, the Malfoys are the obvious choice." She glanced at Draco. "No offense." "Some taken," Draco said mildly, not looking up from his letter. "But you're probably right. My father has a collection of dark artifacts that he thinks my mother doesn't know about." "She does. The ring is in the Gaunt Shack in Little Hangleton. The locket is." Hermione frowned at her notes. "Harder. It's been moved at least once. But the directional sense points south and east, somewhere in London. The cup is in a high-security location, Gringotts, possibly. A vault." "The Lestrange vault," Draco said, looking up now. "My Aunt Bellatrix. She died before letting anything of the Dark Lords be taken from her. She's in Azkaban. She doesn't get a vote." Harry turned to Hermione. "And the diadem?" Hermione's frown deepened. "That's the strange one. The ring's directional sense points, here. Inside Hogwarts." Harry went very still. "Inside the castle. Whatever Voldemort hid, it's been here for years. Decades, possibly." Harry closed his eyes and reached for the Peverell Ring's awareness. The castle's magic unfolded around him, familiar now, welcoming. He felt the wards, the classrooms, the dormitories, the passages, and there, 7 floors up, hidden behind a wall that most people walked past without seeing, a room that appeared only when you needed it, he opened his eyes. The room of requirement. He hid it in the room of requirement. "You're joking," Blaise said, looking up from his book. "He hid a piece of his soul in the room that gives you whatever you need. He hid it in the room's storage configuration, the place where hidden things go. Generations of students have hidden things there. It's probably buried under centuries of junk." "Then let's go find it," Neville said from the entrance. He'd been waiting outside. Gryffindors couldn't enter the Slytherin common room, a point of principle that Hermione cheerfully ignored but Neville respected. Harry looked at his friends. This was the real work now, not the dramatic gestures, not the political theater, but the slow, methodical destruction of Voldemort's immortality. It wouldn't be public. It wouldn't be glamorous. It would be dangerous and painstaking and absolutely necessary. "Tomorrow," Harry said. "We start tomorrow." He stood and walked to the window. The lake was dark beyond the glass, the squid gone to deeper waters. In the distance, past the grounds and the forbidden forest, past the mountains and the moors, 5 fragments of a broken soul pulsed in the darkness, and the Peverell Ring tracked them all. Tom Riddle had cheated death and terrorized a world. He'd murdered Harry's parents, tortured Neville's parents, destroyed countless lives, and left a legacy of fear that had crippled an entire society. He'd done it all in pursuit of immortality, the desperate, pathetic conviction that he was too important to die. Harry pressed his hand against the cold glass and felt the ring pulse against his skin. "You're not immortal," he thought. "You're just slow." Behind him, his friends argued cheerfully about the best approach to searching a magically expanding room full of hidden objects. Draco suggested a systematic grid pattern. Hermione suggested a magical signature trace. Blaise suggested setting fire to everything and seeing what screamed. Neville suggested asking the room itself, which was probably the best idea and which everyone agreed on after 10 minutes of debate. Harry watched them and felt something that had once been foreign settle deeper into his bones. Home. Not a cupboard. Not a dormitory. Not a castle, even, though the castle helped. Home was these people. This strange, cobbled-together family of lions and snakes and eagles who'd chosen each other in the wreckage of an old man's manipulations and a Dark Lord's ambitions. Harry turned from the window. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." They leaned in. They listened. And in the morning, they would begin the work of tearing down the last monuments to Tom Riddle's fear of death, and they would do it together, and they would not stop until it was finished. The castle hummed around them, ancient and watchful and free. The war wasn't over. But for the first time in a very long time, the right side was winning.